So good evening, everyone. I'll kick this off, although we've got 4 committees sitting up here. We're all going to have to call our meetings to order. But before I do that, I just want to remind everybody here that this room is wired for Zoom. The microphones are in the ceiling. Almost anything anybody can say in this room can be picked up. So if you don't want somebody to hear it, you better really whisper. We know this, we've learned the hard way. So be careful about talking if it's something you don't want to be overheard. All right, so I'm going to call the select board's meeting to order at 6:31. Jason,
Call the Neary Building Committee to order at 6:31.
Chelsea,
Call the Southborough School Committee meeting to order at 6:31.
yeah,
And I'll call the advisory committee to order, 6:31.
all right. Okay, so this is the Neary Building Committee's presentation. It's an update from the December 17th meeting where we did kind of the same thing. A lot's happened since then. Costs have changed, they've come down. We've gotten our MSBA grant pretty much solidified. So we're here tonight to basically update the presentation from the 17th. Neary Building Committee will do the presentation. Then the other 3 committees will ask questions as far as what they still want to have answered. And then we'll to the public to answer any questions that the public has, either on Zoom or in person. Thanks. So Jason?
Chris, do you want to, pull up the slides. So it's great to be back with everyone tonight. If anyone out there can't hear me at any point, just yell, I'll stop, but I'll try to go this way so I can achieve so everyone can hear me. For anyone that's been following this project, tonight will be a little bit of a trip down memory lane, but we think it's important to really ground everyone and where we've been, both as a committee for the last 3 years together, but obviously predecessor committees that were before then. There's a bunch of slides. Some are repetitive, some are new, but our goal is to kind of have this be kind of a capstone of where we've been and where we are and what we are going to propose to town meeting. So bear with me as we go through this, and happy to take any questions as we come to the end. So this is a big picture of where we're going to go tonight. We're going to start on the why. And just make sure that that is apparent and obvious to as many people as possible. Talk about our process, both as a school research subcommittee, because there have been a lot of questions about the work of that committee that have come back up in the past couple of weeks. We'll talk about the MSBA process, talk about the educational benefits, schematic design phase, which we just completed, which is what we were doing when we met with all of you in December and what we've now completed in February, project cost and funding, and kind of the impact of the yes and no votes and how folks can stay informed as we go forward. So a little bit about the why. For anyone that hasn't been through the Neary building, it's really important to kind of understand why this project is even being brought forward. And there's a lot of reasons why. First and foremost, the major building systems. Vanessa, I'll have you go to the next slide. The electrical system, the roof, the windows, and the HVAC, all of which, some of which are original to the building, most of which are actually original to the building. And when you think about the age of this building, we are talking about a 50-plus-year-old building at this point. The building envelope, in terms of asbestos abatement has been detected in various forms throughout the building throughout the years. Go to the next slide. An ADA compliance review was done of all town buildings back in 2021. Suffice to say, this building failed on about every avenue possible in that. From a building security perspective, it is not safe for today's safety and standards for school safety and how schools are built and maintained. And there's also no fire suppression in the actual building. I think it's really important to note that although the town has invested significantly in the public schools, this building has not had major significant capital investments since its original construction back in the 70s, absent the addition of the modular classrooms and what I'll call normal maintenance and wear and tear to keep the building moving along over that period of time. All the other schools have either been newly constructed, significantly modified, or renovated about 25 years ago at this point. This slide will look familiar. We've talked about this slide before, But one of the most important and fundamental things we did at the very early phase of this project was we did an existing conditions study. That study continues to be posted on our website and has been there for some time. But we also looked at how to complete a base repair. How can we use the building as it is, as constructed, to accomplish the educational vision of the district and the programming requirements that were needed. We did cost that out, as you all are aware, and that came out to about $63 million prior to any sort of consideration of state reimbursement. Now I'm going to go backwards a little bit. When we think about our process, we've broken our process into two stages. Back in the fall of 2020, a very small subcommittee was formed that included representation from capital planning, advisory, and the Southborough School Committee, as well as the administration, to take about 10 steps back and try to come up with what is the path forward? Should we be maintaining 3 elementary schools in the town of Southborough? What should the grade configuration look like at the middle school level, and everything in between? I think the least kept secret in town, right, is our school enrollment has declined over a period of time. But I think it's also important to note we built all of our schools at the peak of school enrollment. No one is suggesting that we're going to return back to that because we have no data to support that houses will be filled up or construction will occur to restore to that kind of peak. It could happen, but we're not building to that. And I think as you hear each of our statements that we make tonight as part of our presentation, really important to know that. But the other part that the school research subcommittee did was just look at demographic data. And what we determined with a broad brush is our enrollment has stabilized. It's not increasing significantly, it's not decreasing significantly, but every year is different. You use some of the grades we have just currently in the school right next to us. You have one grade that has 8 sections. You have another grade that has 6 sections, right? That, on average is about a 20 student difference per classroom. So we do need to be aware of the volatility that we have even between grades, because that does impact how we think about all of this. So Vanessa will kind of keep proceeding through here. So when we think about the subcommittee's work, that started in the fall of 2020 and completed in March 22. That lined up with a recommendation that was made to the school committee. I believe the select board and advisory were part of those discussions, but really it was a school committee sort of decision at that point in time. The recommendation was then made to form the NBC in anticipation of the MSBA's acceptance into their core building program, and in conjunction with the funding that was being sought at that annual town meeting for the feasibility study that we have now completed. Our work with the MSBA began in August of 2022. To take a deeper dive into each of these steps, we'll go into the work of the capital planning committee and that school research subcommittee. So Vanessa will keep going. When we made our final presentation in February of 2022, most of the discussion was focused on the demographic study in what we thought the enrollment was. But we had completed 2 demographic studies at that point in time. Those demographic studies then led into a study that was really led by our school administrators that know how these schools work, how they function, looking at building occupancy though, septic capacity as well, to figure out what grade configurations would work or would not work with our existing infrastructure, right? So we weren't even at the point of thinking about new infrastructure. We're just trying to see what made sense with the existing infrastructure. Some of the recommendations that came out of that committee, that's the next slide, were strongly recommended moving away from a 3 elementary school model, maintaining elementary schools that only house 2 grades from an economies of scale, not only from a construction or renovation perspective, but also in terms of how the schools operate their facilities, how they think about specialists and educators, and the ability to move teachers around between sections to accommodate some of the changes in enrollment that do fluctuate between grades, or a main guiding factor between some of that. We also spent a lot of time hearing from parents as part of that process about the transitions that occur, and hearing from the principals of each of the schools and learning how every in 1 year, you're welcoming students, and by the end of the year, you're also sending students off. You'll always have that, but these students are never in the same building currently for more than 2 years. And go back a second. The other thing we thought about, and Superintendent Martineau and his team will speak to in a couple of slides, is we did look at moving 5th grade to Trotter. That was an item. I know that has been suggested recently again. To be clear, the committee did determine that there is enough space in the building, but the space was not designed for 5th grade, and there are other educational reasons that I'll let the administrators go into. We also looked at decommissioning schools and how that would work. We spent a lot of time thinking about Woodward at the time. The main reason we were looking at Woodward was not due to its age. It was due to the proximity to this building, to the senior center, to the library, to the town common, the adjacencies that it would have kind of from a town function perspective, and also the limited footprint that that school has in terms of ability to expand over time. That model has shifted since that subcommittee completed its work. So you'll see some conflicting statements in terms of where that committee left off and where we're at today. One of the main things that the MSBA advised us on was that they were not going to participate in any sort of project that decommissioned Woodward beyond a 2-grade school. And it was going to create a major limiting factor in terms of our ability to maximize the state funding and the grant that we had applied for. So that is why we have shifted our mindset throughout the project and through discussions with the school administration. And you commonly hear Finn as the school that may be decommissioned if this project proceeds as currently proposed. Next slide, Vanessa. So now I'll turn it to Superintendent Martineau and his team to walk through the items that he considered in terms of his recommendation to the prior committee related to 5th grade and trotting.
Sure. So thank you, Jason. So the leadership team did look at grade level configurations that were possible. And as Jason mentioned, moving 5th grade to Trotter was an option in regards to space. And we spent a lot of time talking about what type of programmatic experiences we want to provide students, talking about student developmental levels, academic, social, and emotional. And we really thought that 5th grade is best suited at the elementary level. We did look at peer-reviewed research to think about where 5th grade is best suited. Research aligns with 5th grade at the elementary level. We also looked at academics and teaching and learning. Many of our academic programs in our curriculum, pre-K through 5, there is a continuum that has been intentional in terms of the design and the purchasing of curriculum resources for teachers. We also looked at educator licensure. So when you get looking at the licensure of a middle school educator, usually it's content specific, and it's 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. An elementary license is usually pre-K through grade 6. As Jason mentioned earlier, every year the number of sections in a grade level can shift by 1 or 2 depending on the enrollment. And we shift teachers from 5th grade to 4th grade, from 3rd grade to 2nd grade. And again, having 5th grade at the middle school in regards to educator licensure doesn't provide us the flexibility that we utilize on an annual basis. And then just operational challenges. The way Trotter is designed, it does not allow us to segment 5th grade from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So it's really difficult to have a 5th grader in the hallway with an 8th grader. Developmentally, there's just a lot of differences. Also, in terms of operation, you think about lunches. If you've been to the cafeteria at Trotter, it's rather small. We'd have to have brunch and dinner. So it wouldn't provide enough opportunity for the number of lunches. So for those 4 reasons, we really did not support moving 5th grade to Trotter. And again, the reasons for developmental level, kind of the academics, educator licensure, and then the operational challenges that I mentioned.
Thanks, Greg. So from that process, we then moved into partnering with the MSBA. I think most people are familiar with the MSBA, but they are a state agency, but they are very focused on school construction, which includes a funding element to it. It is actually funded by the sales tax that we all pay on goods in the Commonwealth. And it is basically secured funding prior to anyone getting an actual grant. To be clear, they have a very prescribed process. They perform this process for all 351 cities and towns across the Commonwealth that are seeking funding from the state level to support local projects. Not all communities partner with the MSBA due to a variety of reasons, especially if they've been there recently for a project in terms of likelihood to move forward. But we have been fortunate to work with them over the past 3 years. I can tell you the process is thorough and robust. Some of the MSBA meetings that we have had the opportunity to attend really have highlighted the academics within Southborough and the plan that the administration has around the academics and the plan. That is a core part of this entire project. And one of the reasons why we're here. A lot of times we talk a lot about the structural deficiencies of the building, which are hopefully evident from some of the discussion we had earlier. But a huge part of this process was the educational vision of the district and how that ties into the education that the students get in these facilities and how that has evolved over time. So we are now at the funding phase. We've completed the schematic design phase. We'll talk a little bit about more of each of these stages as we go through this. But if the project does proceed through the funding phase, it would go to the construction phase, which is another year of full design and 2 years worth of construction before any sort of facility would be open to the public and the schools. It's really important to remember, and you'll see this again in the presentation, that the funding phase is a 180-day period. So we'll talk a little bit about the votes later, just to make sure everyone understands the need and necessity for both votes and participation in both votes, regardless of where anyone stands on the actual project, because it's going to be the outcome of those 2 votes that would direct the project forward. Unless someone wants to, we've included all the slides in terms of what we considered, but it's important to remember that we did consider 12 different options. We were required to study 12 different options. We can sit here all day long, and I think we actually may find common ground with all Southborough residents on some aspects of things that we moved on from pretty quickly. And I think you would find others that would say you should have spent more time on those. What I can assure you is that the committee was very thoughtful in terms of where we eliminated, when we eliminated, and at all times during the project, we were guided by an owner's project manager and a designer that worked through these projects across the Commonwealth. The other part that's really important is that each phase of the project, the state also had to agree with our recommendations. This is not a rubber stamp process. It's a feedback loop, right? So it's not like we just do our work and submit it. There is an extensive amount of feedback that goes between the state, the MSBA, who sees most schools in this Commonwealth, and the town in our contracted consultants to move through this process. So we looked at 12. We looked at various iterations for both the Neary school and the Woodward school. A lot of people say, why did you have to look at the Woodward school? It's 20 to 25 years old, depending upon when it started to get constructed versus occupancy. The reason we had to look at Woodward in various scenarios around that, including addition and new construction, is mainly tied to the fact that we were looking at grades 2 through 5 and had permission through our application process from the state to look at any combination of grades 2 through 5 in the schools that impacted. We've also heard a lot of questions about why didn't you look at Finn? We actually asked about a year into the process, could we, so we could more fully answer those questions, we would have had to go back to the beginning of the line. And we had reasons why we weren't seriously looking at Finn from the beginning, but we wanted to be able to answer more fully to the community why. So you could look at Finn, but it would be in a new process with the MSBA, and there's no assurances but the MSB would have thought that Finn was at the same level of need for action that Neary was because of some of the recent work that was done on it about 25 years ago. Does anyone want me to spend time on each of these scenarios, or you want me to kind of keep going? All right, we're gonna keep going. So Vanessa, you can keep going. So through the committee's work, we went from 12 down to 3. And this is where there was a significant amount of debate. Again, we ended with a unanimous vote, but there is no way we were unanimous until probably the final night. And I think that's really important to note to anyone that kind of questions the process that we've been through. It hasn't been without significant debate. It hasn't been without significant thought. It hasn't been without significant consultation with a lot of different people, both within the community, but also outside the community that do this on a regular basis. The 3 options that we had significant debate around were new construction for 2 grades. So that's that 305, which is the number of students that we think occupy on an average 2 grades at that level at the existing site. We also looked at taking the existing building, significantly renovating it, but having to add on to accommodate 4 grades. So that's the 610 that you see there. We also looked at new construction. So basically tearing down exactly what's there now and starting from scratch. Part of this was a costing exercise. Part of it was an efficiency exercise in terms of the cost per square foot that it would take to accommodate each student, and also the amount of square feet that each student, quote unquote, occupies within a facility, and then bolting on all the educational objectives that we were hoping to accomplish. To be clear, there was a huge educational visioning part of this process very early on in feasibility. There were a lot of wants at that part of the process, a significant amount of wants. I think I speak on behalf of the committee that we're back to needs at this point. We also believe that any healthy process always starts with wants, and that's when you're going to see how this project has kind of come down in cost throughout the period of time that we have been working on it. And I would like to thank the administration in particular for their willingness to work with the committee, because I think that's the only reason we're standing here with a unanimous vote in terms of where we landed and also where we're headed. We've received feedback from the consultants that we work with. That doesn't usually happen. Okay, we've received, usually it's the superintendent's way or the highway, and then the voters vote up or down based on those recommendations. I think it's really important to note before we talk about why we landed with the 4-grade new option, the amount of compromise that has already occurred through public conversations, public meetings to get to this point. I realize not everyone's going to be in favor, and that's okay. That's why we have town meeting, and that's why we have the ballot vote. But I don't want anyone to think this project was made in a vacuum and it's just one person or any group's vision. This is a collective vision that educators in particular, outside the administration, educators themselves that use the facility have been part of, but also we've scaled back in terms of, do you really need this much, or can you have this much and still get the same result for the students, which is again, a guiding principle of where we want to be at the end of the day. We did ultimately land on new construction. So basically using the existing footprint, building a 2-story 4-grade school on that site, which you can kind of see a very, very general layout here tonight. The next slide, and if you want more diagrams and are very interested in how the design works, we have posted all of that to the website. The 2 major factors that, if you kind of go back to the debate we had in this room back on August 12th, is we saw substantial educational benefits by having 4 grades in the same building as compared to 2, allowing for better implementation of current teaching practices into teaching, including how the school is using their support services. We also saw tremendous economies of scale in terms of the cost of the building. To use an easy example that everyone can relate to, the gym was going to be the same size, regardless of whether we had a 2 or 4-grade school. So now we are maximizing how we're using the gym as an example in each of these elements. the number of classrooms is always going to be the same. We have a class size policy, the school committee abides by their policy with the district. But that was a real factor in terms of how we thought about it. There were other factors that individuals cited as part of our deliberations. But just because we're building for more students doesn't mean we're talking about double the cost. And we're also thinking forward in terms of capital, in terms of what we would need with our other buildings going forward, as opposed to being back to voters in the short term for another building. Next slide. All right, I get to take a breath now. Turn it over to Greg and his team to talk about some of the educational features of the proposed school.
Sure, I just want to make a couple comments before I begin. I just want to thank the community of Southborough for engaging in this work. Whatever the outcome is, it's not too often that a group of citizens gets to determine potentially a school facility that will last for, 5 to 7 decades for the next generation of learners. So I think I feel privileged to have been part of this work and process. I'm very excited about the design, as excited as I get, as many of you know. This is me excited. The leadership team has given a lot of thought around what types of spaces and educational experiences do we want to provide our students in a new educational facility. So very excited about the design, regardless of the outcome. We spent a lot of time thinking about what do our teachers need to be at their best? What do our teachers need to be at their best? What do our families deserve in terms of educational spaces in the community? Regardless of the outcome, we have an amazing group of educators who work daily on behalf of the students. We have a community that supports education, and we have families that are engaged in their children's educational experience, and we're grateful for that. But for tonight, we get to talk about the exciting features of this particular design. To kind of reiterate Jason's point, early on in the process, we got a lot of feedback from educators around what's working in terms of space, what's not working, what would they like to see. We went to visit schools, and we really spent a lot of time thinking about an educational plan, not about what space do we want, but what do we want to accomplish for our students in terms of music programming, art programming, mathematics, instruction, PE, and so forth. Probably the groups that I enjoy meeting with most are students. And I have a couple examples of what students really wanted in their design. And I just want to read a couple of them to you. So this particular student wanted a party room that's been cut from this design, an arcade. We had a couple pools. There were slides connecting the second floor to the first floor. That's been removed in the design that we'll talk about this evening. So I would encourage you to take a look. Students were very creative, but they did have some good insight. So what we're going to talk about this evening is really the enhanced features. And it really is a collaborative effort, input from teachers, from parents, from the Neary Building Committee and community to do our best thinking with this particular design. And the first area that we'll focus on is really enhanced safety and security measures. The buildings that we occupy today, Neary School, is not designed with the same security perspective that we need to take into account in 2020, 2025, and into the future. Was designed and built under a different set of circumstances. With this design, we really had a chance to think about the safety features that are part of the design, from traffic flow, separating bus traffic from parent pickup traffic. If any of you have experienced parent pickup at dismissal at Neary, you know exactly what I'm talking about is not safe for kids. This design really thinks about, okay, how can we make sure that there are safe spaces outside with parent pickup and drop off? Also thinking about security. How do we design and build unified security systems? So that has been factored into this particular design. We've also had opportunities to work with our public safety officials, the police chief, fire chief, to really think about what design features should we be thinking about in terms of the safety. And additionally, thinking about what it feels like to belong to a building, making sure that the spaces are conditioned so they're comfortable, making sure that there's a lot of natural light, that spaces are designed with integrity. So if it's a music space, the music space is designed for music. It enhances educators are able to do with students in the music program. So we feel that the design that we're proposing and presenting really does meet the needs of current safety needs of the current environment that we're in. Really supports kind of the learning environment that students deserve, and also really supports teachers. They live in these buildings every day. The design of this building really supports giving them spaces to do their best, working with students and to collaborate with each other. I'll turn it over to Dr. Reinhorn.
Next slide, thanks. So Jason started talking about this earlier, and I'll continue to share a little bit more about the benefits of having 4 grades together and going from a 3 elementary school to a 2 elementary school model in terms of creating seamless educational continuity, greater connections and community. And as Jason mentioned, in our current model, kids are coming in and then the next year they're moving out. And so a lot of time is spent and energy, both like literal energy and time, but also emotional energy for families, for students, for educators in supporting those transitions. By moving to a 4-grade model, we have the opportunity for greater continuity, whether it's thinking about individual academic continuity, progress monitoring, relationships, that social emotional component, but also collectively in terms of the social emotional pieces, having the consistency of expectations, of systems that the kids are living within and that families are functioning within. It also supports more streamlined communication from the schools. So we have many families who have children across the schools. So hearing from 3 different schools, reducing that to 2 schools. In terms of that continuity, there's also opportunities for the older students to interact with the younger students, to have peer mentoring, to have student councils, and some of the things that in a 2-year trajectory, a 2-year time period in a building are harder to develop and without that sort of older to younger age span. In terms of the teachers, this also means that we can have greater academic alignment and vertical alignment and have that collaboration across the grades, which can be challenging when we're working across buildings with differing schedules and just the physical separation. It also creates opportunities. I talked about peer mentoring, but it creates opportunities in terms of the teacher mentoring, where we sometimes have, it is challenging for teachers to mentor across buildings. They don't get that face-to-face time. And with a 4-grade configuration, you have more opportunities for the teacher collaboration, the teacher mentoring, and teacher connections. So this, in many, many respects, creates greater continuity, stronger community relationships for the adults in the building, for the families, and for the students. Within that 4-grade community, you might wonder, well, isn't that get really big for the students in terms of there being 600 students in a building? But part of the way we worked, again, with contributions from our educators on this design was to think about learning neighborhoods within the school. And so the school is organized so that there's, the design is organized so that there are grade level learning neighborhoods, so that students would have a sense of community within their smaller grade level within the larger school. And within those learning neighborhoods, there's the opportunity for the grade level to gather in the learning commons and to have the various support services and interactions across classrooms within that learning neighborhood so that they have that connection and continuity within the grade level. As we think about the learning neighborhoods, which I just talked about, if you look at the design, the schematic on the right, the branches that are sort of reaching up each represent a learning neighborhood. So this is a picture of the first floor. So what you're seeing is the front of the building would be common spaces like the gymnasium, the cafeteria, the offices, and then that's 2 learning neighborhoods that you see going on the left and on the right. As we designed the learning neighborhoods, we were looking to make them as fully accessible and inclusive as possible. And that obviously was a minimum requirement, was to meet the ADA compliance, which is obviously true across the board. But the higher bar was to really think about greater inclusivity and spaces where our students are part of that community within a learning neighborhood and getting all of the support services they need while staying connected to their peers. So our special education supports, our English language development supports, speech and language pathologists, OT, PT, really integrating that in so that students are not traveling across the building or to places that will make them feel excluded, but rather keeping them in their neighborhoods where they feel included. We were also able to design more special education spaces than we currently have, so that our specialized programming would be enhanced and expanded, so that students that are currently, in some cases, being placed out of district and being sent to schools where we cannot meet their needs, being sent to schools because we cannot currently meet their needs, we would be able to keep more of those students in the school system through this design. Oh, I'm going to say one more thing on the last slide, sorry. The other thing that we have in this design that's pointed out in pink is the adaptive PE. So another aspect of creating the inclusive learning spaces and making sure this meets the needs of all learners is having the specifically designed spaces for the support services. So having the adaptive PE space adjacent to occupational therapy and physical therapy and adjacent to the gymnasium so that those professionals can be interacting with each other and the peers have maximum opportunity for inclusion, but specific spaces that meet their needs. In general, as we worked through all of the various design features, there was a constant focus on finding the balance between what I just talked about, which is that specific design to meet needs, and flexibility and adaptability, so that spaces, as Jason talked earlier about, enrollment fluctuates. And so we want, where possible, to have the simplicity of design and the consistency of design that we can adapt when we need a grade level with 8 classrooms versus a grade level with 6 classrooms. So we were looking at having the technological supports throughout the building so that spaces can be used in different ways, having flexible furniture and flexible spaces. And that, really sets us up to be a future-ready environment for the learning and to be able to accommodate all of the different instructional approaches. So we were really looking at universal design for learning and being able to create universal access points, which means that we need to have those features consistent throughout the design. So while we're trying to balance that flexibility, I also mentioned the intentional design, not just in terms of our specialized programming and our support services, but also in terms of some of our programs that we're so proud of as a community. We just came from next door where there's an arts night at Woodward, and our music programs, our arts programs, they are so well developed and deserve to have these spaces that are specifically designed to meet their needs. So in this design, we had the music teachers, the art teachers, the physical education teachers weighing in, the world language teachers, so that we have music rooms that have the appropriate spaces from acoustics to music storage to performance versus practice spaces. We have art spaces that can support the kiln and the storage and the art projects, but having that balance with the media and library center of intentional design, where in other spaces we need a more flexible design. This is also the design of the gymnasium, really and a lot of these spaces really keeping in mind the community needs and the ability for the community to use these spaces as well. So I'm going to pass it off to Becky Pellegrino.
So thank you. So as Stephanie had mentioned earlier, a two model school really does lend itself to greater collaboration and also connections, but it also provides the district to maximize its resources. And I think that's particularly true when it comes to staffing. And I would really look to the student support services area as the key area I think that is going to benefit from this model. Currently, we do have a number of speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and other support staff who are traveling from building to support students. And so that travel time does cut into the amount of time that they are actually spending face to face with our students. And so by moving to this two model school, we will be able to better maximize their time and provide more services to that population. And then I would also say that it would also help us to better align our professional development across grades and provide greater collaboration among a greater number of grade levels. Right now, we have obviously 2 grade levels in each school. And so by having the 3rd grade being able to work with the 5th grade, if they're not able to do currently, or at least not as seamlessly, this model is really going to improve those systems as well.
Thank you all. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on the schematic design phase. This slide oversimplifies the amount of work that went into it. If anyone's really interested in this topic, the schematic design report should be on our website and really can walk through I think it's over 200 pages that was submitted to the state in terms of their to get kind of their comments on this part of the process. The end of the day, where the building is currently showing is 99,564 square feet. To use order of magnitude, the current Neary is approximately 70,000 square feet for the 2 grades, arguably potentially 3 grades, given the fact that the superintendent's office that is used by all of the 3 districts is about 7 classrooms at the current point in time. Through the process, Arrow Street, who's our design firm, spent 5 months developing the schematic design, working directly with the educators that are going to use the space. The way that the building came together was there was a concerted effort to maximize the potential ability for state grant on every space. So there's significant discussion amongst the committee when we had spaces that didn't align with the state guidelines, and making sure that we were maximizing that, albeit there is certainly plenty of space in any building built within the Commonwealth that is not fully eligible for reimbursement. So it's not always a dollar for dollar. But the important part to denote is we take this, the part that's being used for the superintendent's office out, you just focus on grades 4 and 5. The current building uses about 201 square feet per student, as opposed to the proposed building with 164 square feet per student. So really showing the efficiency of how we plan to use the space in the proposed building. It's also important to note we're building for what we believe today's enrollment is, with about a 10% contingency. We're not building for what ifs, but we have the ability, if something happens in this community down the road that this school cannot accommodate the 4 grades that is being proposed to hold, that we can add on this site. That was an important factor that had to be considered as part of the process. Kathy and Andrew, do you want to cover project funding? Or you want me to keep going?
You're doing great. Go ahead.
All right. All right. So for any of you that weren't on we had a Zoom only meeting the other night, but we took a deeper dive in finances. This is certainly going to take a deep dive, especially if you're not interested as much in how numbers all shape up. But I will tell you, we're also doing a repeat presentation of that on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. at Trottier. So if you want to come to the live version of that, it'll be 9 a.m. There is Q&A and that is part of that as well. But we also make sure that the recording is posted not only on where the town usually posts the recording, but on our website as well. So this will be a repeat of some of that. And there is some more details around how the state thinks about debt funding and some of that. I imagine some of those questions may come up tonight. Here's where we're at. We are proposing to town meeting $108.5 million project, of which we are estimating currently that there will be about a $35 million state grant. That will be formally voted by the MSBA, which is a public body that does have public meetings on April 30th. So that is an estimate until they fully vote it. But obviously, there's a lot of collaboration between our team and the MSBA leading up to that meeting that we can publicize where this is trending. We also, based on the design of the building, in particular with geothermal being in the building, we're estimating approximately $5 million of state and federal grants based on what we have proposed to put into the building. I'm sure there will be questions about the federal landscape and everything that is happening in Washington. It's important to note that about 1 million of that is state funded, about 4 million of that is federally funded. The state funding is already funded. It's through the Mass State program that you see both in residential and commercial uses, versus the 4 million is really the federal incentives, which are part of a congressional package that would have to be formally repealed for that to go away. It's not something that can be done unilaterally at this point in time. We estimate that on a gross perspective that the debt service on average is about $4 million a year to fund the $68 million town share. We also believe that there is significant operational savings that will come by this proposed school. We'll spend some time talking a little bit about those. We believe we've been conservative at this point, and there's more vetting that will need to be done if this project passes in terms of additional programs that may be able to be housed in the school, some of the utility items, etc. So this is really focused on a starting point, not an ending point. But again, we believe this is more of a floor, not a ceiling at this point in time. I know some people only believe in gross, some people like to see the net, but we believe when you look at this project, once would be on the tax bills, if it passes, we're looking at about an estimated additional debt service of 2.8. I get if you're numerically inclined, the debt service is still going to be the 4 million, but the operational budget should come down. But we're just kind of using that as the net cost of this project in isolation from anything else that goes on and is funded through town operating budgets. These are all using a 4.25% interest rate in a 30-year bond. We have looked at other options in terms of longer bonding as well, but these are the numbers we plan to present. When we take that down to the anticipated residential taxes and the average home value, once this project is kind of fully, quote unquote, on the books, we are estimating the net impact to the taxpayer is about $703. That's what we call steady state. I'm going to show you in a couple of slides what it means each year, kind of how we build up to that on a gross perspective. Again, talking gross and net numbers, I'll try to distinguish between them as we go, just to make sure you can kind of tie it all together. Next slide, please, Vanessa. When we think about the gross cost and how that then netted into the town share, there was a point where we were looking at a $123 million project. No one on the committee had any desire that we were going to bring anything like that forward. How we got from 123 to 68 is this story that I have been telling in terms of a significant amount of diligence by the school administration, a significant amount of diligence by our consultants, and a significant amount of diligence by our committee to make sure we were bringing forward an appropriate project that we could stand behind. This is the history. The other thing, there's a lot going on here, and we're happy to come back to this slide, especially during Q&A. But one of the things that we worked with Skanska and Arrow Street on was trying to compare to other schools, right? And trying to compare with what other communities are doing. This is always dangerous. Southborough is Southborough. Every other town is their own town. There are certain reasons, certain populations, certain number of students. But we thought it was important to show the story around this all as well, in terms of what this project is compared to the average. And to be clear, we haven't always been telling this good of a story in prior iterations, but we feel like we've gotten to that point where this project is about as efficient as it's gonna be if we're gonna build a 4-grade school. And we feel good when we compare it to other communities, even though we acknowledge that that's sometimes a dangerous game to play in, given that every community approaches these sorts of decisions differently and is of different size. Okay, so the other thing we thought it was important to do is I talked a lot about steady state a couple slides ago. This is how we actually get to steady state. And there's some fluctuation in it, and we feel it's important to be transparent in terms of the gross cost of this project. Again, this is a gross cost. It does not include any operational savings because that will be in the operational budget. It won't be in the debt service. But if you were just to look at what's the capital cost of building this project, this is what we think this project means to the average residential tax bill over a period of time. Next slide. I'm going to start on this slide, but I'm also going to turn it to the superintendent if he has anything to add. One of the things that has been asked all along is, what are these efficiencies you keep talking about, right? And this is an important discussion because there are impacts in the moment, and there are also impacts in the future. What our understanding as a committee is that with the school committee and the district and the administration and the budget that they're going to present next week at town meeting, this is the start of a process for how attrition is dealt with as we go forward. It's important to denote the word attrition. There have already been certain decisions made about backfilling in certain specialist roles and how they're thinking ahead as opposed to hiring to then have to potentially be overhead count in certain positions when the new proposed facility opens. But I think it's really important. I'm going to reiterate that this is an attrition exercise in terms of how the district is looking at their staffing longer term. And to be clear, these are fully loaded costs, right? Depending on town, how the town presents the budget, there's salary costs, but we all know that there's a significant benefits cost to every FTE that this town has. So we feel like this is the start of our longer process on the operational budget. But we've really focused on staffing at this point. As the superintendent noted, there's certainly programmatic. There may be outplacements that's in the budget right now that they may be able to bring back. Well, there's certainly ideas of that. That situation also is a fluid process depending upon the students in the district in any year. So the other thing I think it's really important to denote when we get to the actual town budget slides, we've left Finn alone. So we've assumed someone, we don't know which department, we assume someone's going to have to pay to maintain that building. We've continued to just keep it at the same sort of utility bills, the same sort of electrical bills, same sort of custodial bills. All of that is still in our projections. So we can debate long-term how that building is going to be used. That's not necessarily in the four corners of our particular committee, but we don't want anyone to think that we are taking savings into account on this slide and then just going to kind of move it somewhere else. Like this is just the school side from a true personnel perspective at this point in time. We've kind of left the utilities alone because we're confident that something's going to be happening there. How we map it, all of that can be a future discussion that's probably more for that side of the table than this side of the table. I will pause and see, Greg, do you have anything you want to add on that from a district
No,
perspective?
the one thing I would add is that we do keep track of when educators are planning on retiring. So if you think about our current educator workforce and where they are in terms of experience, we will have a wave in the next 3 to 5 to 7 years of significant retirements. The numbers that we've built into our projections for FY26 and FY27 do factor in the known attrition and moves and the ability to consolidate some programming. So those are real numbers for FY26 and FY27. We do anticipate additional savings in FY28 and FY29, but we didn't quantify that. It's more difficult to predict as you move out. But FY26 and FY27, those are real dollars.
Can you just briefly speak, if this project is not successful, we don't get funding during the 180-day period and the town has to rethink what we're gonna do with Neary or any other school? What does that mean with these numbers?
So one of the examples is, so currently we have 3 libraries, Finn, Woodward, and Neary. With the new 4-grade model, we would move to having 2 libraries, therefore needing 2 librarians. If, for example, if this project doesn't pass, then we would go back to having 3 librarians. So there's some efficiencies in terms of how we're supporting programs that are built in as a result of having a 4-grade school versus a current model where there are 3 schools. And that's just one example of several.
Keep going, Vanessa. Go back one slide if you skipped one. All right, there's a lot of numbers on this page. This was in our presentation the other night as well. We've also heard throughout the process that everyone is very concerned with the impact, what's happening in the overall town budget. I don't have a comparison slide, but if you're paying attention enough to like 2 slides ago, this project passes, that's not the reason why you see those large jumps in the next couple of years. It is certainly the reason you see it in the out years. So I think our request, as you think about any votes you make on not only this project, but town budgets or anything else that comes before the voters, we think it's important that you understand the push and the pull, and that this project is certainly a large ask. But there are other large asks as well. And we would just ask that as you consider those, obviously everyone will prioritize something differently for their own, based on their own personal values and objectives and affordability as well. Our job is just to provide you the data for you to make those decisions. I don't know what's happening to Vanessa.
Hang on. There we go.
Yeah, so I think it's also important to be transparent of what we have projected in these numbers and what we haven't projected. So Kathy can keep me honest, but this is assuming the budget passes as presented at town meeting on Monday night. Obviously, that budget passes at a different level. These numbers all change, and we will obviously update it if that is an outcome that happens. Otherwise, this is your starting point, is the budget that's being presented on Monday night. You go to the next slide, Vanessa. We hear a lot about, all right, well, if we do this, what aren't we going to be able to do from a town perspective on the capital? As you know, I sit as the capital representative on this committee, and we maintain a 10-year capital plan. So in all of those numbers, we've assumed a few things. One, we've already approved a lot of projects. Okay, those we've taken out debt, or we're going to take out debt. We've authorized the ability to take out. That's all baked in. I think we had a question the other night on breakneck that obviously has been approved twice now. That's in the numbers as an example. We've also assumed everything passes on Monday night. To be honest, there's not a lot of debt funding on the general fund side related to capital, but we've assumed everything passes at the annual town meeting. We've also assumed that the Finn, Woodward, and Trotter roofs are all going to get replaced in the next 5 to 6 years as well. And we have estimates around those. Trotter boiler is also on the capital plan during that time. There's a large recreation project right up front here at Choke Field. To be clear, that project is much larger than 1 million, but we've assumed for now, for the sake of including something, that there would be at least 1 million of a town share. Again, taxpayers will be able to choose as each of these projects come up, but we're trying to show what's ahead and what that would mean if the town says yes to everything. We've also assumed if Finn becomes available, that there would be some cost to make it better usable for the user groups that may use it at that time. That also includes Porterville Hall. One of the things that's really important, to denote is at least the Council on Aging has voted that they would prefer to maintain Porterville Hall as a home in the senior center if Finn did become available, but have greater use of that building, i.e. move the town departments most of the town departments that are in that building out of there. So we have assumed that you would need to do some modifications to that building, including a lift to get between some of the floors. So we are carrying a number for that. We are also carrying in the numbers you had in the last slide, is there will be some potential modifications to Woodward in terms of making, in particular, toilets more a different height given the age group of the children that would be in that building. It's also, I think, our responsibility to say what we haven't thought about, but we've heard talk about in the community. But it's not officially on the capital plan. It's not officially have a funding date within the next 6 years. We've heard a lot about talk about road bond bill and the quality of our roads, the quality of our sidewalks. We have included a projection of annual funding for roads, but that's our normal funding. So that could be going against a bond as opposed to an appropriation. If the town decides to do more than that, which I think everyone knows that number is a pretty significant number, that would be incremental to any numbers that are being shown here. As everyone knows, the library was part of a competitive process with the state and unfortunately did not proceed into the next round of funding. We know there's still needs that are going to be there. We just don't know when that project's going to come up, what the library board is going to bring forward. So we have not projected anything in these numbers at this point in time, but we do acknowledge it's a point of major discussion within the community and a priority for a lot of people. The other thing that is newer, and I know there's a newly formed committee around this, and Al has recently requested time with capital to talk about it, is the concept of a wastewater treatment plant somewhere in town that would require some sort of capital funding. How that would all work, obviously, well outside of the bounds of this, but to the extent they would hit our tax bills, we have not projected that at this point in time. We've also, Kathy, keep me honest, not projected any sort of shift. So any sort of movement between residential and commercial tax rates during this time period as well.
That's correct, but we did talk to our assessor about whether we should, and he said no. So
Okay.
there's a shift built into projected fiscal year 26 of 2.5%, but none after with those next 6 years. That's correct.
All right, Vanessa, next slide. All right, final slide on finances, but this has come up a few times now. So we actually had a sustainability subcommittee that was as part of our included representatives from our main committee. They worked offline with our designer as part of a subcommittee process. Those were all public meetings. Offline is probably not the right word. And they looked at 2 alternatives that they brought to the Neary Building Committee. I'll save you some of the acronyms, but we have gone with the GSHP option, which at first glance, you're like, that's a more expensive option. It also comes with significant incentives that I spoke about on the prior slides as well. So we believe if all the incentives come to fruition on the back end of this, we've actually chosen the better option if you're purely looking at it from a net cost perspective, quite significantly, about $2 million difference, but also a more efficient use going forward. To be clear, we think the difference between option 1 and option 2 is only a $50,000 difference in terms of the annual utility costs between those, but they obviously do come with different construction estimates. One other thing the committee will have at our disposal for at least a period of time is as we go through the design process, if we learn that some of these federal incentives may be in jeopardy, we can shift, right? What will that cost us? Well, obviously, we're going to have a lower cost of quote unquote acquisition, and it will potentially impact our operating budget by about $50,000 a year. So we are not necessarily locking in at this point in time. We certainly have a strong recommendation, and that's what we put forward. But we also feel like we have an understanding of the options in front of us. The other thing that came up quite often, even though there is gas service, I believe, to the school right now, public schools cannot be built with gas service moving forward. So this is basically, we were limited in terms of the options that we had based on obviously guidance that is out there. Okay, I'm getting there. Get your questions ready. All right, so key votes. Few key votes. Regardless of where you stand in this project, our job is to encourage you to vote twice. And we really want to make sure the public understands that, regardless of the outcome on May 10th, and regardless of the outcome on May 13th, it really requires action on 2 different dates if you have an opinion on this project. Also really important, I know it's probably not news to anyone in this room, but I realize this recording may be played over and over again. you actually have to be present at Trotter, at Algonquin. You can't zoom in, you can't remotely vote. It's only gonna be who's in the hall at the time that a vote is called for. So I think it's really important that, if this is important to people, that they understand that they need to physically be present, they need to make sure they're officially registered as a voter, and that will be the first discussion. It's also really important to know, regardless of the outcome on May 10th, the ballot vote will continue on May 13th. The ballots will be printed well in advance. It's obviously part of the local election as well. And you don't have to go in order, okay? Now, we continue to get questions and we've started to hear, I'll call it falsities in terms of what would happen in the event of a failed vote. That's for this group to come together, right? Let's just let this play out. If there is a failed vote in either one of these, I think it's incumbent on all parties to come back to the table and decide what's the best course of action for the town. Keep in mind, the select board is the only one that can call a town meeting, right? So there'll be further discussion. The Neary Building Committee does not have a view on what should happen, because we need to hear the feedback from the community, what they think and where they want to go with this project. So really important, 2 separate votes. I'm sure we've been in contact with the town clerk as well. I'm sure he will make it very clear what the any sort of early voting, absentee voting that is available outside of kind of in-person that occurs at Trotter on May 13th. All right. So if we get both yes votes in on those 2 May dates, we would proceed pretty quickly into hiring a CM at our CM at risk, our construction manager, which is the procurement that we've decided is best for this project in compliance with Mass General Law. And we would do about a year of design and then move forward to hopefully a school opening in the fall of 2028. Next slide, please. We also heard a lot about this, and it's not lost on anyone. But I'll be honest, the committee hasn't fully discussed this, and I think we all can acknowledge that the world changes on a daily basis. We know there's unknown economic conditions, both locally, nationally, and across the world. I think, especially if it comes out in the dialogue tonight, what I'm committed to as the chair of this committee is to have a discussion with the committee, because we realize that the vote that's going to be on town meeting floor is the full funding. It's not the town share that we have been showing. So once that vote passes, the authority to spend the money would be rest back to the Neary Building Committee once both votes pass. We know that there can be some volatility in terms of what if the construction is going to cost more because of a tariff or some other economic item. What if we get, the total project cost is wrong? Few things. This is how construction works. There's always volatility. I realize that this may be a period that some believe is more volatility than normal, but we do have a contingency built in, right? So that has been built into all of our numbers. But I also believe that our committee should discuss, if you ask us to, and think it's a good idea, what would happen if we get the funding and all of a sudden the project finances look like they're going to be out of whack and the town share is going to be significantly more than what we present to town meeting voters. I think it's my personal view. I think it's incumbent on all of us to come back to the table and have a discussion around the design elements of it and figuring out what's important. So if it were my vote, I would certainly, if I was on the committee still, not just proceed ahead just because we had a vote. I think we need to be smart. We need to be diligent. I know people will make analogies to prior projects in this town. We had tariffs at that point in time too. We had uncertainty at that point in time too. And just because the money was there, that committee didn't spend it. I would hope that whoever's sitting and representing the Neary Building Committee would do the same thing based on kind of what was presented to town meeting voters. And obviously no committee can meet kind of outside of the public. So I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of questions about that the other night in our finance subcommittee's presentation. And I think there will continue to be questions, and I have no idea where we'll be globally by the time we get to May. But I think it's important on us to rely on the representations we're making now, and that whoever's holding these seats be aware of those and be held accountable by the appointing authority, which is kind of sitting right across from us, as it moves forward, if the conditions change on what sort of discussions should occur. All right, one of the last slides. Impact of a no vote. To be clear, it can have a no vote that can become a yes vote. Like I said before, that's incumbent on all this group to come back together if there was a no vote. But if we get beyond the 180 days of funding and this town is not able to secure the funding and the taxpayers are not behind it, here's what would happen. We have to decide whether Neary stays open. And if Neary is going to stay open, we have some immediate things we got to take care of to keep students, staff in that building. We also need to acknowledge that the educational plan and vision of the district would not be met. And that's obviously a core value of most in this community. The other thing that's probably not going away is construction costs are never going down. They may stabilize, they may flatline, or they may significantly increase. So while there is certain uncertainty, we also don't know what 3, 4 years, 5 years down the road. I haven't heard anyone acknowledge yet that there isn't some sort of construction project in front of this town related to some school. I realize there's varying views in terms of how that should work, but I think we need to understand as a community, we probably are going to have to spend some money for the first time in 25 years on the capital of our schools, regardless of whether you're in support of the plan that is in front of us tonight. And I think the final point, and we have received, I would say, significant questions on this in particular in the last 2 weeks, is it is very clear to us that the MSBA would say, thank you, Southborough. It's been nice working with you. When you're ready with another project, here's your statement of interest form, and we go back to where we were back in the spring of 2022. That's a decision the town of Southborough can make. Our job is just make everyone aware that that's where this would go if we fail to get the 180 days of funding. The main reason from an MSBA perspective of why they do that is because they, quote unquote, earmark the funds once they vote on this project for us. And if they have other towns and communities that are ready to go, they're going to release those funds to move forward. So that is an outcome that we are aware of. To be clear, the town at any point in time can do any school project they want without the MSBA. There's no requirement to work with the MSBA. There's just no reimbursement. So if that's the direction the town wants to go with any of the other schools on a smaller scale, it's our job to just say we can do that at any point in time and educate everyone around that as well. All right. How to stay informed, go back, Vanessa. The appendix is only if people have questions on certain things that we haven't covered. We have a website, it's updated almost daily. I'll tell you, we as a committee weren't necessarily always happy with the website, especially up until recently. But a lot of it is our data and our final sort of presentations have really only come together in the last 30 days as well. There's a lot of information up there. We are always happy to get an email if there's something someone's looking for. We try to be as responsive as possible. We'll have some piece of data, whether it fully resolves the question, that will be up to obviously the end user. But we're happy if you don't see something on the website, just ask us and we're happy to get it for you. But also more importantly, we realize some people like social media, some people really don't like social media. We try to post as much as possible. I'll be honest, our Facebook page doesn't have a great following right now. We try to post to the Southborough Share and Care as much as we can, but there are limits on how much we can post there too. If there's a way you want us to get you information, we just want to hear it. And we're open to hearing that. I don't expect we're going to have too many public meetings, but obviously when we do have public meetings, we're in education mode, I feel like at this point, where there's nothing we're deliberating in terms of what we're bringing forward at this point. And we have a series of other upcoming forums that we continue to make the public aware of. Like I mentioned earlier, there's the Finance Committee presentation on Saturday. We will have a very deep dive into education next week. There's a 10 a.m. session at Woodward on Tuesday, so during the day. There's an evening session at Trotter in the auditorium on Thursday night as well. We're trying to accommodate schedules in different ways. And then the following week on Wednesday, Mark and the PAR team and our DPW superintendent are going to be taking a deep dive on considerations around the actual site and the adjacent landfill as well, because we know that that's been a hot topic as well. So that's what we've scheduled at this point. If anyone feels like there's more education beyond this, we are happy to do that. And also, we'll probably try to find a way to capture questions here that we didn't answer through the presentation in future presentations. So with that, Vanessa, I think we can take the slides down, but be ready to put them back up depending upon the questions. And I promise the town meeting presentation is not that long.
We want more, Jason. Keep going.
Paul says you have 5 minutes.
I'm fine. I told Paul to tell us how much time we have. But Kathy, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. So the next part of this is questions. So Vanessa, you got the Zoom up, right? Okay, so let's start with anybody that's here tonight. We'll start the audience here, then we'll go to the Zoom questions. Betsy.
Hi, Betsy Rosenblum, 5 Strawberry Hill Road. Thank you, Jason. Amazing. Academy Award, or I guess it's an Emmy because you're on TV. I do have several questions, so I don't know if you want me to ask half dozen questions or do one and then give everybody else a chance.
Why don't you just go ahead?
I'll just start. Okay, so, and these aren't necessarily in order of importance. Some of them might seem small to you, but I tried to go in order of the slides. So the first thing I had a question about, Jason, was Finn. I didn't understand exactly when you said that would have been a whole separate process with the building authority program. But there was also a slide that outlined 12 things you considered.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did, can
Yeah,
you
so let me-
explain that to me?
Really good
Explain
question.
it to a third grader. I didn't
No,
understand that part.
this is like, it's complicated. So you didn't miss anything. So we got those, we got those 12 options. I remember, I believe superintendent and I were actually touring another school that day. And I basically, my personal reaction, and I had no problem sharing this on a record video, I was like, what are we doing here? Like, why are we looking at, like, one of them was build a new Woodward. Right? Why would we tear down a beautiful, well-maintained 20-year-old school? That was one of the options, one of the 12.
Where did the, I'm
They
sorry.
came from the
where-
MSBA.
MSBA.
They came from the MSBA.
Oh, the state?
The state said as part of your process, these are the 12 options we'd like you to look at.
Oh, I didn't understand.
Yeah.
Did y'all understand? I
Yeah.
thought it was you had, they said you have to look at 12 things.
No,
And you looked at Southborough and said, here's 12 things.
no, we were given,
The
we were
s-
giving
Oh,
as part of this process.
State never included a non-new build, non-renovation addition project. That was the
Non-new
state
builds.
decision.
The state, one of the required items you have to do in any MSBA project is a base repair, is what we call that. That's it. That would have been looking at Neary.
Getting rid of Neary, using the other 3 schools, no new school. That was not an option that was presented from the state
Because we weren't,
because
there
there's no
have been no,
MSBA money.
yeah, but they would have, if they thought that was a viable solution and didn't accept some of our earlier solutions that came out of that capital planning school research subcommittee, they wouldn't have entered us into the process.
I think I understand. So when people talk about utilizing existing space and not building a new school, we have to go back 4 years in time and not get involved with the state. If you're involved with the state, then you're talking about building something.
Correct. So they saw, and look, they're comparing us to 100-plus-year-old schools in Boston. And they saw something in Southborough that said, right, and you can
Yeah.
agree or disagree with that, but like that was how they look at these projects, is how they told us.
I don't know if it's you're that talented or it wasn't that complicated, but I understand.
But let me answer
We have a third grade opening.
So, we, as the committee, none of us had anything to do with that process. That was the school administration after the school research subcommittee had completed its work. The other important part of, I really want the community to understand this, whether you agree with it or not, that's up to you. We went back to the state when we got those 12 options. And we said, some of these are great, we absolutely should be looking at them. But we also said, can we look at Finn as part of this? We think if you really want us to look at 12 things, we'd much rather look at Finn, even though, to be honest, the committee had moved on from Finn before that point. We said that'd be a much better use of our consultants' time and energy than talking about building a new school next door. They said, because Finn holds K 1 and 2 currently, and because that was not part of the application that was originally submitted, right? We didn't say we're gonna build a K through 6 school. So we're gonna build something that's some combination of 2 through 5 or some thereof. We would have had to go back to step 1 in the application process. We didn't know whether that would even be received. So we would have had to pull ourselves out. We could have gone to the back of the line and the state could have said, that's great, but Finn doesn't rise to our level of need compared to what else. Alternatively, they could have said, yeah, come right on in and you're now a year and a half behind where you are, but you've got a head start. We're just gonna keep you going at the same pace. So that's what we did. But that's also why we're at this particular point with this particular proposal.
That also goes a long way to explain for people like myself who didn't understand why a municipality might need millions and tens of millions of dollars on the table. But because it limits you in your creativity from the get-go.
Well, I mean, that was the decision.
Yeah,
We
yes,
all,
no, I
I
understand.
mean, we wrestled with it.
It amazes me that the state would say, like, we're not interested in giving you any money unless you're gonna build something new. I mean, I'm really stunned.
No, to be clear. They don't, no, it's not that we have to do something new. We have to go through a whole process to determine whether we renovate, like, so one of the options we had to look at, first thing we had to look at was just gutting existing Neary. Just gut the interior of it and just build what you can within that space. So like, there is a renovation aspect to it, there is a new construction part of it, we just happen to land at new construction.
But
Could you get a name
reusing
and
that
address?
location.
You have to give your name and address now.
Oh, Joanne Pearson, 101 Newton Street.
Okay.
Sorry, because it's sort of a little bit more formal, which frankly, I just think, I mean, points of order and all that stuff, that it's easier if it's more conversational rather than, state your name, question, formality. I think-
We have to get the name and address, but
Yes, yes,
I'm
I'm
personally
sorry.
fine with the, as long as,
Public
Yes,
record.
yeah,
yes,
yeah. So, yeah, so it doesn't have to just be new. I want to be very clear about that. Could have been gutting that existing building was one option we looked at for a while, but we moved on from.
Right, but the we looked at is because the state was dictating what 12 options you could look at.
We
Right.
had to look at it. Yeah. All right, Betsy, I'm back to you.
Okay, my second question goes to the superintendent regarding licensure. Could you clarify this relates to the educational plan? Is it not the same license K to 8 and then a separate license for high school? Did I understand you? There's a separate license for K to 5 and then a middle school,
So it's K through 6,
K through 6?
and then there's also middle school licenses, which are content specific, so 6,
Okay.
7, and 8. And then obviously at the high school level, there's content specific high school licensure.
So
So
if
if you are licensed in just grade 5 or K through 6, and you are a 6th grade teacher, if there becomes a need to teach math in 7th grade, the principal does not have that option. You have to
So-
teach in 6th grade.
And this would affect if we
So
entertain at some point in the mystical future, 5th grade together with 6, 7, 8.
correct, so we,
It would affect who could teach
correct.
in that space.
How did the other
So-
schools in the state handle that?
So
fact?
5th grade, a 5th grade teacher could teach 4th grade, 3rd grade, depending on the grade level.
How did the other schools in the state that
Introduce yourself.
Sorry. How did the 10 Minor Street? How did the other schools in the state that have 5th through 8th grade together handle that issue?
I'm not sure how they handle the issue, but they are the licensure that teachers have that dictates what they can teach. So there is a 5 through 8 model. The only option for those teachers who are licensed pre-K through grade 6, they only can teach grade 5 or 6 in that middle school.
5 and
Yeah.
6,
Yeah, so they couldn't teach 7th or 8th grade.
but they still could teach 2 grades.
Joanne Pearson, 101 Root Street, are they only allowed to have one license? Like they can't get a second?
No, you can have multiple
Okay.
licenses, so, you
So
know,
they could teach if there's a fifth grade.
correct, our
in a
current,
different-
so our current fifth grade team, for example, their licensure is that pre-K through
Yeah.
5 licensure.
It's kind of like, I guess, if you're a lawyer and you have to be licensed, I was a landscape architect, you have to be licensed in different states, it's the same
Same
model,
idea.
same exact model.
Thank you. My next question goes back to Jason or anybody on his committee. At an earlier meeting, I think maybe back to December, the issue was raised about fixing the Neary roof. And if I understood correctly, they said there's a state law that if we do repairs to a school over 30 or a third, 33, third somewhere, was it a third of the assessed value? That would trigger the need to bring the building to ADA compliance. And we were told that the Neary roof project would trigger ADA compliance. On slide 37, it says Finn, Woodward, Trotter will all need new roofs. Are those buildings currently ADA compliant? And would putting a new roof on Finn, Woodward, Trotter trigger ADA compliance for any of those buildings that are not currently?
Mark wants to take it.
I'll answer that. The assessed value of Neary, that's really what you're concerned with. Because it's a 50-year-old school is very low. So that 30% of the assessed value becomes what you get concerned with. As a committee member and a member of the community, I am one that would argue strenuously that we have been punting handicapped accessibility in that building for 40 years. The law came into effect in 1976. And we haven't met it yet.
You're speaking for Neary?
Yes.
What about the
Now,
other
Finn
three?
and Woodward, both meet the handicap codes that were in place when they were renovated. Have there been some changes? Sure. But those assessed values are much higher. So
That's the key
potentially
thing.
those,
And to-
Their assessed values, Neary is really low, so it triggers it much faster than the other three schools.
so it probably wouldn't be triggered. But again, I would look to the those projects to determine other capital items that need to be looked at that point in time that need to be addressed.
This is the town, so I wanted to clarify, it's not just ADA compliance. It would be
Everything.
sprinklers, like fire suppression, it's building code.
So you brought up.
Yeah, it has to be brought up to code, period. So there's new electric code. So it's each item, right? It's you have to bring a building up to code. If you trigger this, which is why you usually do things in stages, like for example, we had a long discussion when we did the addition at Corderville Hall of making sure that everyone understood the balance that the project could have without triggering additional requirements. It's then a philosophical discussion of what each building should have. I would also refer everyone to the 2021 Southborough accessibility report, which then I believe there's a separate one done for the schools too, Greg. That would have every little detail of what these schools need, but again, most of these schools saw something about 25 years ago. Neary did not.
The other code you need to be aware of is there was a change in the building code last summer, where we now have an energy code that we have to adhere to. And that would be triggered at Neary, which would mean that we'd have to put a new facade on the exterior of the building and replace all the windows. Because that building does not meet the energy codes. Finn and Woodward don't, but it's not as major piece of work that could be triggered at that point. They meet it in a basic level, but there's a lot of aspects of that code where they would have to be beefed up if you did a major capital project on them. But Neary fails in a lot of those code issues.
I don't want to belabor this issue because it's getting late and I don't want to monopolize the conversation. Could you update your website to provide, because I'm telling people, oh no, we can't just put a new roof on Neary because it will trigger millions of dollars of state law. and that doesn't make sense to some people, and it didn't really make sense to
We
me.
can do that.
That the state
Great.
doesn't, it's raining in the school and we can't fix the roof without having to spend millions of dollars. Could you put a citation to the general laws and the codes
We can.
on your website? So, I was an
But I-
attorney in another life, I would feel better telling people that if I knew where it came from.
Yeah, I think it's also the committee's position that it's not just the roof that needs to happen there, right? So if we were to go.
It's a
It's a-
3-year,
Yeah.
3-year
It's a
window.
3-year
too.
window, so you'd have to wait let's just say it didn't trigger that 30% threshold for a second. Let's just say the roof, you could do the roof and just squeeze it in based on, I'm not saying you can, but let's just hypothetically, you're still ignoring everything else I had in those two slides.
That's
But
okay.
again,
I'm
yeah.
dealing in facts
Yeah.
and somebody somewhere back in this process, since I was paying attention, said we cannot put a new roof on Neary without
That's
triggering millions of dollars to bring that. And my kids went to Neary. I can see bulldozers trying to go through cinder block walls so you could get a wheelchair in a bathroom. I'm familiar with the facility. So I like to see statutes. I like to see primary sources. I understand it's not what everybody wants, but I'm curious to know what the law actually says.
And Betsy, just so you know, it's $11 million for Neary, 41 million for Trotty.
The assessed value.
Assessed value.
What about Finn and Woodward?
Finn was 17 last time we looked.
And how much is the roof at Finn?
4 million too.
I thought it was 5.
It's 2.5 is the last.
Yeah.
Roof
2.5.
assessment.
19,271,
19 is the
19,271,000.
I just have a couple of quick ones. Oh, I missed this one because my handwriting was sloppy. World languages. When did we start teaching world languages in 2 through 5? That's great, but I wasn't aware. Not in my children's.
It is there.
2 years ago. So this is actually our 3rd year, and we have a plan to move it to grades 4 and 5 next year.
Great, okay. And I think just point of information on slide 31, the figure of 703. For people who are budget and municipally challenged like me, I've heard highlighted and saw on that slide 703 for the first full year, but it's also going to be projected out for a 30-year bond. So maybe mention that.
Yeah, sure.
It's not a 1 year, when it all settles in, I don't know, what was that, FY 32, that's 703. I'm not saying it's misleading, but it's not the full story. It's 703
Add
for the
word
first
annually
year.
After, think that will do it?
What?
Just write the word annually after?
Is it 703 each year?
Nowhere did I see the light,
I
I
had
had,
changes each year.
Once the bond stabilizes, right, that should be roughly 703, but you gotta
The
remember.
debt service won't change. That's 4,070,000 for 30 years. We work with our bond consultant to get that number using a 4.25% projected interest rate. But the operational savings of the school, which is the other number in it, might change. They might go up. So that number might go down over time. On top of that, we're expecting house prices to continue to go up. So we used a 4% year-over-year increase in house prices to get to what we project the house prices to be on 1/1/31, which is the basis of your fiscal year 32 taxes. So the number, the 703, the top number won't change. That 4,070,000 is the debt service if the interest rate is correct. And that was a conservative interest rate. But that savings might go up over time. So it actually may go down over the term of the bond.
just from the average homeowner who's not a budget person, you see 703 for 1 full year, for, the first full year of the bond. And nowhere does it say, and you're gonna be paying.
The next 24.
What's this 30-year bond at on the slides, 4%
Yeah.
interest rate?
And I thought that was a stupid question, but I asked it the
703
other night on
times 30.
Zoom at
Yeah.
the meeting. Is this 20 years? Is this 30?
Alright,
Hey,
got it.
I'll be dead and gone by the 30th year of this project, but for a younger homeowner, it might be interesting.
And also Kathy said the other night, there's going to be a calculator on the website so people can put in their own values and calculate out what their tax implication will be.
That part I understood. What I didn't see is, and this is gonna go on for decades, and I just think that ought to be
Yeah, okay.
made clear.
Noted.
I'm not suggesting somebody's hiding something. This is an amazing presentation. But to the average person who's not as involved as you are, you see 1 year 703. You don't see 30 years 703. And then on slide 32, this is my last question. The cost of this project was 123 million on May 9th, 2024. And on 3/28, it was 68 million. Do both of those include the state reimbursement?
Yeah, this is what we thought South Road taxpayers were gonna have to pay, so yes.
Thank you. Okay,
So the construction cost has gone down over the last 9 months and the grant has gone up to get to the new net number. So both have gone the right way since May of 24.
thank you. I understood from the meeting the other night that the savings was a combination of things being knocked off the project revisions, and the state including a greater part of this project in reimbursable.
And that the rate went up,
The rate.
reimbursement rate went up.
Yeah, okay. Oh, we got
So
four.
there's, school got smaller, right?
After the
More
school,
stuff was eligible, so we
They
got.
looked ahead and said, you're gonna be broke. we're
And
gonna
we got
re-"
more money by rate on top of that.
So Andrew, if you could, what was the reimbursement rate you were expecting as a
18, 18%.
18 in May of 24? And now it's,
32.5.
that seems like a big change.
Well, there's extra points you can get by making it green and doing the geothermal. There's another 4 points there, doing a maintenance plan, a couple extra points.
So it's not related to the income of the town.
Yes, it is.
There's
They
some
actually
that
raised that
changed. They actually raised the base rate. I don't know, what, 2 points,
39 to 41, yep. 2
39 to
points.
41.
Based on Southborough income?
Yeah, so another year passed, so they took a look at it again, so ours went up a little bit. Hopkinton's doing a school too, theirs is a little bit above ours, not much, so similar to it. On top of that, they raised their reimbursement for construction costs because construction costs keep going up, so they raised that another $60 per our foot too, so we got that. So it was a combination of a lot of things that got us from 18.5 to 32.5.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Joey. Oh,
Joanne.
sorry, no.
Let him go, then I'll come back to you, Joanne.
Hi, James Eastland, 31 Wildwood. When you talked about the state not being willing to reimburse costs for Finn because it didn't affect 2nd through 5th grade, which was what the proposal was for. And yet there are costs in this for Woodward to move classes from Finn to Woodward, which isn't 2nd through 5th grade. Why is one accepted but not the other?
Yeah, to be clear, the state's not partnering with us in those costs. Those costs
That would be-
are $500,000.
So did you, at that time, when they said we wouldn't support Finn, did you relook at what you were going to do to Finn to make it work and say, well, okay, well, if the state didn't reimburse us for that, would that make sense for us to do and not have to do the other option of rebuilding Neary?
I think what you're proposing is, why didn't we just shut Neary and consolidate into Woodward and Finn and do whatever we had to do at Finn to make that work? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay. We cannot fit with our current population in those two schools without modular classrooms.
But our current population is changing when Northborough takes their students back.
Greg, how many classrooms is that?
4.
So they are taking, so for example, if this project proceeds as proposed, we will be using Finn in Woodward for a 2-year period to house all the grades we have K through 5. The Northborough Northborough pre-K students will be back in Northborough at that point in time. We are still going to have to bring in modular classrooms. 2 million of the 68 that we are proposing, with 0% coming from the state, is just purely to have trailers out back of these schools for 2 years to fit our existing student population in. So to make that work, we would have, like, in perpetuity, right? That's not ideal, right? We're going to put a lot of short-term stress on our educators for long-term benefit. To make that work in the long term, we would have to think about a permanent solution at both schools, I would think, to, if that was the plan that someone brought forward.
And so
So on your the the information on the site where you had the boxes and you rated the different plans with red, green, yellow,
Mhm.
and it shows the population. If you subtract that 60, it would have changed the box from yellow to green. For Finn.
That was with 2021 enrollment. That was you're talking about the 2021 study?
I don't know when the study was.
It's the grade configuration study. I mean, I'm pretty certain that's what you're
Yes.
talking about.
That is,
But you also, this is the tighter school. Finn's tight, but this is much tighter. Because of the septic capacity in particular, I remember specifically, I got a question. At town meeting when we were going for feasibility funding. And we actually can't fit in Woodward today without those modulars with 3 grades. So we couldn't just take a 3rd grade and put it in there. Woodward was the larger concern always than Finn, just from again, pure space perspective, ignoring any sort of educational sort of programming. Joanne?
Yeah, so
Oh, hang on, did you want to go, Roger?
Well, I will after the audience.
All right.
is done.
Go, Joanne.
Joanne Pearson, 101 Newton Street. I have a number of different, it's sort of like, let's see, I have a number of different questions that different people will, I'd like to respond to, respond to me.
Maybe I should go.
So there are a lot of differing models and thoughts on the composition of middle schools in terms of grade groupings, and that's been going on for 50 years. And it includes like K through 12 schools. So I'm wondering if when your group of educators went to visit schools, did you look at any of the existing, because there are a lot of them in the state, 5 through 8. There's one, I'm trying to make the closest one is Lincoln. There are a lot of them around. Did you look at any of those and discuss how is that working in terms of all the parameters that you were looking at and having 5th graders in with 8th graders? You know, and now you said with the teacher licensing issues that there's nothing that holds them back from getting licenses for different grade levels.
no, when we did the evaluation of grade configurations. And we did look at the research around having grade 5 at the middle school level. And we looked at the social emotional kind of age grouping of kids in 5th grade compared to 8th grade. We made the decision not to pursue that as an option.
Without going to any of the schools where it is 5 through 8 and saying, how is this working?
Correct.
But who exactly made that decision?
The leadership team,
Who
and
exactly
principals,
is that?
educators, central office leadership team, and then we worked closely with the capital planning school research subcommittee.
So how many people was that? Around ballpark.
15. Can I just comment too?
Yes, sure.
That oftentimes what you'll find in terms of grade configuration is not often designed based on research, but based on available space. So oftentimes you'll see a variety of grade configurations if you look across the Commonwealth based on the building they had and how they fit students into those spaces. So there are absolutely schools across the Commonwealth that have placed 5th grade with their middle school. But our job was to provide our recommendation based on research and what our expertise is, which is in teaching and learning, and that was our recommendation.
But you didn't actually talk to any of the schools, the principals, the educators who are in a 5 through 8 system. There's been, and I get a lot of discussion about having that 4 grades together, that it provides mentoring, older and younger students interacting. So again, that was part of why I was asking, did you actually talk to educators, principals in the schools where there are 5 to 8 grading?
A couple thoughts about that. One is that in this situation, if we were putting 5th grade in Trottier, and Superintendent Martineau mentioned this, but we would not be able to have the 5th graders together in sort of their own wing, for example. And so what we were describing for the new design, you would have that sort of learning neighborhood where they are together with their own peers, where most of their activity is taking place. But then you could have the opportunities to bring them together for peer mentoring. Whereas if we fit fifth grade into Trotter, we would be sort of fitting it in, but it's not designed for 4 grades. And we would also, because of the current configuration, we would have like our curriculum, our ELA, our English language arts curriculum, our math curriculum, our science, our social studies, we have K-5 curricula. Like our resources, our professional development are aligned K-5, they're consistent resources. And then we have different programs 6 through 8. So you would now have the 5th grade disconnected from the other grade levels that are in sort of those aligned programs. So in other towns where they have potentially had that model, they have made, right, they've potentially designed around it, they've had curriculum choices around it.
Yes.
And so that's part of,
Yes.
part of the factor as well.
So it can be modified, it can be looked at, it can be creatively redesigned, and you can base that on other schools that have already done that. I mean, it's not, you wouldn't necessarily be creating the wheel again, right?
I mean, I think the bottom line is,
It could,
it wasn't our recommendation at the time, it
Yes.
wasn't our recommendation
yes,
to look at putting fifth grade, the middle school, 5 through 8 for a variety of reasons. I think in terms of the reasons mentioned, it wasn't something that we were putting forth as educational experts in the community, so.
and a point that you just made, that, in a lot of towns, they did it based on what was available, the monies in the town, and I think that is a very important point. And although I have a couple of things on education, I'm very, well, I'll just ask this one because it seemed like when I saw that, the slide with the, and you mentioned the flexible furniture, which is kind of a really cool idea. It seemed like it's sort of individual desks and stools or chairs or whatever that can be fitted together to be a little group, and then they can be separated to be arranged like this. It could be arranged like, well, there's nothing that prohibits, like in this room, you have that furniture. You can do it in any rectangle, right? I mean, it doesn't require a certain, overall width, versus length.
We
to
were
do.
pushing desks together in 1965 when I was in
Yes,
first
yes.
grade.
I mean, it's probably like a no-brainer, but if you got, you buy new furniture, you buy that furniture modular, and it can be arranged however you want it in whatever the overall room size is, right? Correct? Okay. I was confused by the slide, and I don't have the number of the slide, but it might just be something that you missed just in writing that slide. It said the maximization of resources slide, and it referred to a 2 elementary school. Did you mean 2 elementary schools as like, it was just a little.
I think the
confusing language. It might
language was
just be
too model,
semantics.
it's a 4th grade elementary school, I think.
Having 2 in the
Oh,
system,
yeah.
so.
Oh, so it's just sort of the way the language.
I think we'll change it to 4th
Yes.
grade. You can clearly tell which slides the educators wrote versus the committee as well, so.
Yeah, it did say maximization resources.
that's a good
It
comment.
Was the,
Yeah.
title. So, when it comes to that, the overall budget for the town and the things that, Jason, you had mentioned, that were not considered in those, and again, year after year after year after year of tax increases, there was no break in getting tax break and getting, increases.
30 years down.
There was no, and you said, it wouldn't include roads, library, wastewater. But I didn't hear anything about old water mains that need to be repaired. I know they did one on Newton Street a year and a half ago because we had one of the oldest water lines. So that's a big project. It didn't include.
Water's not
anything else.
included in the general fund. Water's an enterprise fund that gets paid by the water bill.
Water is included in the debt. Part of the debt obligation, so up to down.
For the total ratio, but not for this calculation.
So was that I'm not quite clear. The entire Newton Street was dug up, not last summer, the summer before, and new water mains were put in.
You're paying for it in your water bill over a period of time.
But if there are certain other water mains in town that, like if it's, I don't know how much money is just sort of sitting in that fund. If it became critical that on a certain street and a water main needed to be replaced, the town might have to go out, the select board might say, hey, we have to have some sort of special assessment to do this because we can't wait until we accrue enough money from the water bills, which,
Well, they bond them, which I think is Al's point is. You do a large project like Newton Street, it's bonded, so it's paid over a series of times. You get the money now to pay for
right,
it.
but that wasn't considered anywhere, or was it?
Because the numbers were, to be clear, there's two separate items, just to make sure everyone, the numbers we're presenting is what you see in your individual residential tax bill.
Mhm.
You have water service at your house, you also get a water bill,
Yes.
right? So the cost of it, like a Newton Street project would be in the water bill, not ever in any of the numbers we showed on the screen, even though it's long past. What Al is referring to is regardless of the funding source, we take on debt as a town, right? So whether it's Newton Street, whether it's this building, whether it's a school, that's all debt of the town, and that impacts certain ratios that our bonding agencies look at.
So what I'm asking, in that projection out, was it 8 years of tax increase, tax increase, tax increase? Did you take into account that we might have to float a bond for, have you?
No.
That will never include anything with water.
So water is its own
The
separate.
water main, I don't mean,
No,
Water main, all the infrastructure,
You're
the
gonna just raise
trucks.
your
the
water,
employees.
raise your water,
They're not gonna
raise your tax
okay,
bill,
so-
they're gonna raise your water.
so
bill.
we would,
And they do.
and they do, yes, okay. And any subsurface drainage, we have old, in where we have subsurface drainage, so catch basins, manholes.
Stormwater is included in the general fund, and that would be part of the DPW budget, just like roads.
And so that has been included in those increase after increase after increase projected.
Anything
those
that's
numbers
currently in the
that
capital
was on
plan,
that
which I
slide.
think is including the culvert, two large culvert projects that are on the current capital plan.
If more come up,
Well, if more
They
come
have
up,
to be added.
they'd have to be added if they were large enough. We also get chapter 90 funds, and we have an established $400,000 a year for roadways and that kind of culvert maintenance,
but
right?
it
So
probably would mean, if say 5 years down the road, this has to be done, that the tax bill, which is showing, we're looking at 3.7% increase, or whatever that number might be, it could be higher, or your water bill also could be a lot higher, right?
if something came out that wasn't currently in the capital plan, that was a very large project
Yes,
that couldn't be absorbed by the BEAU chapter 90 funds, state grants for culverts and other stormwater projects, and the current allocation that we do every year towards roadways, stormwater maintenance, then yes, it could change your taxes, just like anything else that could be unforeseen.
okay. And I'd also, talking about the unforeseen, in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, we've had all sorts of expenditures and things that we had to approve doing this project and that project, which I don't think anybody really envisioned, or certainly the people in town didn't envision. That would include things at St. Mark's Park, Burnett House, the golf course coming back and saying, oh, whoops, the irrigation system, nobody thought about that before. And now we need more money from the town to put in an irrigation system, otherwise the golf course will never be self-sustaining, blah, blah, blah. So projects like that they might be smaller, but they're 750,000 here, 700,000 there. And so those sorts of things too, I look at it and I look at the increases year after year after year, the numbers that you're giving, that we kind of have a history of all of these sorts of projects coming up, that all of a sudden we have to raise taxes because we have to fund them. So I just wanted
And
to,
you're right, there's always a chance that something's gonna come up that's not on the
Mhm.
plan,
Mhm.
and it probably will.
Yep.
A couple things you mentioned don't get funded from real estate taxes, the irrigation system for the golf course is coming out of the CPA surtax, everybody pays with their bill. So, Burnett House, that's also coming out of CPA funds, so that's not your real estate taxes. That's not your base real estate taxes, that's
But
at
it-
1%.
but it's what we're paying. I mean,
But I agree, so I
it's
agree,
coming
you're
out of my
paying, you're paying a
pocket.
CPA surtax too.
Whatever little, glass you put it under, it's all coming from us.
But your point's well
There's a-
taken, there can always be things that come up that we
Yes,
have not, we
yes.
do the best we can.
Yes.
This capital committee that Jason's chair of, the bylaw that we passed a few years ago requires them to maintain their main charge is to maintain a 10-year capital plan. So they're always going to be adjusting that as we know more and more. So you're right. We can't predict things with certainty, for sure. We do the best we can. We put it on there when we know about it, but things do happen that aren't expected.
And I just think people should be very aware of that
There is
and those things have happened.
there's a difference between, I'll let Jason correct me if I'm wrong, between the way that capital planning looks at our capital needs and the way we might look at them a slightly different way. Capital planning, and I was chair of capital planning at one point, looks at specific projects. It tries to understand, and to the extent that a specific project is on the horizon, it tries to make the most reasonable estimate it can and figure out, how in the world are we going to pay for this? And without making a judgment relative to the merits of the particular thing. There is a difference because we have a number of things which we kind of sort of know we're going to have to do, but we haven't grasped enough to say this is what we're going to have to do. I'll give you an example of that. We have a number of failing culverts in town. We know over the next 15 years that we're going to have a bunch more culverts fail because they were all built with corrugated steel and they're going to fail. But we haven't, and once again, I'll let Jason correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't explicitly budgeted for another set of failed culverts, but we know they're going to happen. And one of the things I've made an estimate of what the other thing is, we have a bunch of our debt, and this is where we now separate capital a bit from our debt. We have a bunch of debt which is funded from specific sources. So we have debt that is funded by the water receipts. We have debt that is funded by the CPA. We have some and a few other things like that. All of those debts that are funded by specific sources are not today paid out of the general fund, but if worse came to worse, because it is our debt, we would have to pay it out of the general fund. When the state asks us to look at all of our debt, it says, look at all of your debt, because at the end of the day, if for some reason the CPA went away, the general fund would have to support the Burnett House or Chestnut Hill, for example. And so we have to look at all of our debt, which includes, by the way, a chunk of Algonquin and the Gonkplex. It includes a chunk of Assabet. It includes a bunch of other things like that. So we have to separate a little bit capital planning from debt analysis and looking at how our debt is structured. We have essentially 4 broad classes of debt. We have the debt we've already authorized. We got no choice. We got to pay that. We spent the money. We're going to pay it. We have debt that we know is going to relate to capital maintenance. Some of that is on the capital plan. Some of it creeps up out of the woodworks every year. Culvert collapses and stuff happens. And some of it, for example, we know in about a dozen years, Algonquin's going to need a roof because it's going to turn 30 years old. We know that we're going to have to replace water pipes. So that is debt. It's not debt that shows up in the general fund, but it is a debt obligation of the town. So and the state says that we probably need to have a number somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 4% of our general fund allocated to capital maintenance debt. Then we have debt for things that we think we'd like to do. And we're talking about it. And obviously the 600-pound gorilla on the table right now is this project. It's bigger than a bread box. And there are other things, we have Choate Field, we have a library. We know we would like to do something, borrow a chunk of money for roads. I'm skeptical that we will be able to use the future stream of Chapter 90 and the 400K, because I think that the 10 million we're going to borrow is really to deal with the maintenance we should have done over the last 20 years. But that's an argument for another day. And we're now beginning to talk about a wastewater treatment plant. That's, again, those are all things we would like to do. And so we need a comprehensive debt analysis that looks at all of those things, because the state, in its infinite wisdom, it has given us two guidelines. It has given us a guideline of our debt relative to equalized value. We're in good shape there. We could actually do everything we wanted. And they've also said debt relative to the general fund. That's a less rosy picture. And so,
Where are we in that?
pardon?
Where are we in that now and where will we be
Today-
after this starts?
Today, with the existing debt, we, our debt relative to the general fund is right around 6%. It's going to taper off fairly quickly, whereas we pay down the last of Algonquin, and then we have a couple other things that are gonna roll off. The big sort of steady state thing is this building, but that's existing debt. You know, so it's gonna, if we,
And what does the state want us to be?
pardon?
You said
The
6%.
state
What is the state?
guideline is that you shouldn't exceed 10%, your debt service. Which is, you know, the money we pay every year, which includes principal and interest, should not exceed 10% of the general fund. And and so we're right at, we're if you add in sort of the 4% for capital maintenance, right now, before we talk about anything new, we are right in the 5 or 6% range, which is over the next 10 to 15 years. And it will vary, but yeah. So that's the good news and the bad, but there is you know, people sometimes conflate debt with capital plans, and debt projections, which have to take into account, you know, the fact that we're going to need to support things that we don't necessarily know about, versus the more detailed and harder work that the capital budget committee does, where they're trying to, you know, figure out how are we actually going to pay for this new ambulance, or this new fire truck, or something else.
Joanne, can I add into that? In terms of the library did not get the state grant.
I know they didn't.
So the library is actually gonna turn back $150,000 this town meeting. So sometimes things change.
Well,
Yeah.
Questions on the project?
So,
We got people
can I
in the
make-
audience that wanna.
So let
ask
me make a
questions.
suggestion.
Marjorie.
Roger's been waiting to speak.
Yes. So it's fine.
Bonnie's had her hand up, Patty just put her hand up. And we don't always have this many committee members in the room, and we didn't go around and see that, so. I'll defer to you on how you wanna go in order, but I do wanna make sure we leave enough time also for the committee questions too, because it may inform some public comment as well.
Vanessa, are there still no questions from Zoom? Okay, so it's you.
So maybe go to
So
Roger.
Has been waiting. for
Yeah.
questions.
So this is I just want to follow on to what Al said. And it kind of relates to timing. And I think Kathy, in the financial presentation you gave the other night, mentioned that the timing was actually pretty good. In other words, what Al said is that, yes, we have debt to the general fund, but that's tapering off as we pay down Algonquin. So a lot of times there are certain times it's advantageous to go ahead and bond other things going to the future. So I can't speak to the specifics.
It's true, our
but-
debt's very low right now. We've paid off all the schools except for Algonquin, and that's 2 years away, and that one will be paid. So we are at a very low ebb as far as debt, especially school debt. Okay, so Bonnie, I don't even see you, Bonnie.
Well,
There you are.
Bonnie's and Patty.
Am I actually blocking something?
No, it's okay.
No.
Believe it or not, no, it's Pat.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay.
Where are we going?
Patty, sorry, Joanne.
Okay, hold on a second. Bonnie, you go next,
Bonnie,
then we'll go
Pat.
around the table here.
Up there or here?
And Bonnie, you tend to talk very
Bonnie, Pat.
softly, and we
Yeah,
can't see you,
one
so you
second,
may
I'm
want to
gonna
move up a little
I have
bit.
two simple questions, but I want to follow up first on the ballot question, on the town meeting warrant item. The town is approving the gross number
Correct.
because the reimbursement doesn't come right away either.
Comes
And not
throughout the
everything-
project up until the final audit, and they hold back at the back end.
And if we go over, I assume we're not gonna do that, who has the authority to approve those overages?
Okay.
So town meeting.
Because you
is-
really have up to 108.
Town meeting, so this was my point on the
I know,
economic
that's-
uncertainty slide. Town meeting is giving. The town the authority to spend up to 109 million, right? Like that's really what,
Ceiling.
yeah, right? Now, the building committee is usually who has control of the budget. The building committee that was appointed by the select, board, right?
So it's a town project under the control of the Board of Selectmen. Kind of managed by a separate committee who reports to the selectmen. I think that. The final say is the Board of Selectmen to keep track of what's happening at this level over here.
Yeah, I mean, I would think you would have a regular
Right.
project update
I think
as part of any.
community
project.
needs to understand it. I understand it, but I
Yeah.
think that needs to be disclosed with a number of that size.
We agree with you in total.
All right, and the second, you might have to put up the slide since I'm visually impaired. Slide 17, it says preferred design on it. It showed the design,
Yeah,
and then slide 22 showed, I think it's the same design, but if you just go to slide 22, because I have to change glasses, and this will be my last question.
And that's, I think it's 21.
21, the
That's,
enhanced,
that's fine.
that one.
That's 17, the preferred. This is
22.
21.
It's true, it says 22.
Go ahead.
All right, well, you can
That
use
is,
that
we're
one.
looking for like a flow, like a,
I was looking down at, you were talking about security.
that's one more, yeah, one more up.
All right. But that,
There
you go. And one, I think, I'm sorry.
That says enhanced safety and security measures.
All right, I don't want to go into the security part of it, but it has a courtyard.
Yes.
And to me, the courtyard does not appear to be closed off. And is it going to be used? It should be closed off from the exterior. From the outside.
I think we'll say
Right
noted
there.
for design, but I would also say students go to recess.
Well,
and-
I just happened to notice it and I'm saying, all right, it's a nice space, but are we going to be able to use it for what I'm thinking? But I mean, I would double check that.
I think it's something we can.
So there is
explore.
also,
That's all right. I don't need the details,
Yeah.
but I think we need to.
there's a plan to use that space for educational purposes.
So if it's outside use, I think you need to look at an alternative for safety.
Noted.
All right, that's it. Thank you.
Now we are going to be patient. We're going to go around the table. One of the things that the three committees here that have joined the Neary Building Committee have to do, and I think you want us to do, is to take formal votes that actually are included in the printed warrant. That printed warrant is going to be done fairly quickly, so we're going to all be taking votes soon. In fact, select board may take their vote tonight. We're going to see if that the appetite is going to do that. I'm not sure what Andrew's planning on for advisory or Chelsea's planning on doing the K through 8. So what we need to do now is go around this table for these three committees and make sure that all of their remaining questions have been answered, because this may be the last opportunity to do that before we actually take our votes. So Chelsea, why don't you start with your committee, see what else anybody needs to know to make their decision.
Laura.
No.
Roger.
Mark.
No. And I think I have Alan online.
Just have a question for Chelsea. How many people on your committee?
Five.
Who's present?
So myself, Laura, Roger, Kamali, and Alan. Zulik is or was online.
Thank you.
Just a phone number, but there's no one named Alan. Okay.
Yeah, I think
Good.
all our questions, I've attended the latest financial Zoom call. That was very informative. I thought the way that you presented that was really helpful for the town. There's been multiple Zooms that I've joined, so questions are answered through there. And then I just would reiterate too that in the last year and a half, we actually are fortunate enough to have the expertise of the leadership staff in the in Southborough. So when Greg, you were saying earlier that the leadership team, the capital planning team, in terms of what recommendations you gave in the beginning, they have they are experienced leaders, right? And so we took that information way back then in terms of understanding what the proposals were. So
And the school committee's updated every meeting,
yeah.
you know, on the status of the
Mhm.
building committee progress.
I don't have any questions. I think that this project predates my position on school committee, but I've been able to follow it since inception. And I think that the educational benefits in this project, you can't forget about that. And if you walk through our elementary schools right now and see how the teachers and the educators and all the support staff work with our children in the buildings that we have, it is amazing. They do a fantastic job. But then sitting through all the visioning sessions and looking at how our support staff can service our children without sitting in a desk in a hallway and seem like you're being punished for needing to get pulled out of a classroom, and you could actually be incorporated into your learning community with a small group of your peers and an educator in a small space, and not have people walking by you and distracting and all of that. I think there's just such added value for our students. And I think it's really exciting to listen to what the educational benefits are, and having I think that one of the bigger parts of this plan is allowing the vertical integration with our teachers, and also the relationships that the students and the teachers have with each other. Every other year, you never see those teachers again, unless you have a younger sibling in that school. And so if you made a connection with a teacher and that teacher wants to follow you in your academic journey, it's really difficult if you're on the other side of town. They don't have time to go in and check on their former students. So I think you're not going to get that for every grade, but if we can get 4 grades together and have that experience for our students, I think it's so important in today's world for students to have those connections with their educators. So I think that's it from school committee.
Andrew, you want to go next?
I think you had one, right?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say, your committee has done an unbelievable job over a period of 3 to 5 years. The complexity of doing a project like this, the amount of thought that's gone into it and planning is almost unbelievable. And people have to recognize that you're all volunteers. This is not your job. You're not sitting there all day doing it. And I think we all need to appreciate the work you've done, regardless of how people think about which way to vote. We should all express our appreciation to you, and I do. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So Jason, you've heard me say on many occasions that I'm not a numbers person, so I'll ask a couple of dumb numbers questions, and I ask them so that people who suffer from a similar disability that I do might understand better. So on Monday night, I heard the 703 figure and put it up there again. But there was another slide that said 681 in 2032. So what's the difference?
That's the overall town budget increase.
It includes the 703.
So that includes, so the 703 is basically baked in, kind of earlier. So that's a combination of the 703 plus the regular, COLA adjustment, salary. It's what the estimated,
Okay, so it's not just, okay.
it's an
gotcha.
all in kind
Yes,
of what they
okay.
anticipate.
So maybe let me try to, thank you for your comments, by the way, but thank you. The one thing I will say on the numbers, what that's telling you is that there's going to be decreases elsewhere. Like everything else is going to, like operationally has caught up, but this school will be the large driver if passed of your tax increase in FY32 based on everything that's known today. It's the inverse of what we're looking at for FY26 and 27. Is basically my way of putting it in layperson's terms.
Okay. Other question is, when we last met with you, you said that in 2029, you projected that the average cost for taxpayer for the project would be $1,207. Now we're seeing 703 in 2032. Can you explain? I understand there's been a change in the numbers over time, but that's a 40%, more than 40% change. Is it apples to oranges? What? So can you go into that?
There's an apples to apples and then there's an apples to oranges. The apple to apple is we were looking at 82 million of a town share when we made that presentation at 1,200 per household on the average household. We're now looking at 68, right? So just that 82 to 68 is a large driver. The additional new fact, which is how I go from apples to apples to apples to oranges, is we've now been able to quantify the operational impact of this too, which would impact the operational budget, not the debt funding.
The net impact.
We didn't have that number when we voted in August. We just had the 82 number, so that 1207 was based on that without the operational cost savings. So 82 has come down to 68, and then we've been able to, with school funds, we've been able to estimate the reduction in FTEs that will also occur because of the new project.
Okay, but the drop is more than a 40% drop from the 1207 to the 70. And the drop from the 82 to the 68 is more like a 17% drop.
But
That's where I'm.
So the debt service on average is about 4 million a year. We added in, we're saying that there's to be over $1 million of operational savings. So 25, like there's 25% right there.
Enough.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Marcy, anything?
Sure. I just wanted to say that echo Barry's sentiments that committees have worked really hard. I think I was the lone holdout on advisory who voted against the study for the school, despite Mr. Martineau and Jason's detailing me before the vote. So I just wanted to highlight that I agree that the grades and the economies of scale, you guys have really thought that out. The design is to be more inclusive and the neighborhood community feel and the maximizing of the state grant work, impressive. And I just wanted to acknowledge that because I've been a real skeptic. I also appreciate the school's attrition review and trying to save money on operational costs. All that said, I think that I still have concerns about competing priorities that I think will definitely raise the tax rate higher than outlined. And that's a big concern to me. I also just want to clarify a few things. One is the 4 million debt service will last till 2056. Is that right?
Well, depend on when they.
Permanent bonds are probably
Is it
2032,
start
right?
in 29 or does it start in 22?
Term is probably 32, right? I don't remember the exact.
May of 31 is when we expect it to be permanently financed, but Marcy, just like we did with this building. And this is the treasurer's call. So the town authorizes the debt, but then he sits down and works with our bond counsel to actually figure out how to issue that perm debt. When we did this building, we actually had a sweet spot that we took advantage of interest rates and actually financed it early because we knew we could get a lower interest rate. So that will all come as far as the actual term. The state and the governor in the Municipal Empowerment Act has said, okay, we know schools last at least 50 years. We will let you, if that bill gets passed, go 40 years. We took a look at that for this, and the interest on that extra 10 years is a lot. So we thought, let's just stick with 30 as far as this presentation goes. It's a normal amortization period for most schools. So let's just use it for now. But in the end, when Brian sits down and tries to finance his debt, he may pick, like he did here, we've got 4 tranches in this building, 5, help me, Jason, 5, 20, 25, and 29, I think is how we ended up doing that. So he may do something similar depending on what the interest rate curve looks like. So it might be 30, but it might not be, depending on what the interest rate environment looks like.
Thank you for that. Couple other things. After the votes, presuming it passed, it enters into the design phase, right? So similar to, or sort of an offshoot of Bonnie's question, I think is if the costs at that point
which you'll truly understand, right? At that point, you'll understand more of the real cost. What would be the threshold to abandon the project at that point if cost is too high? Is it the 12 million contingency or is it beyond that?
I think that's a discussion that should occur and probably can't occur here tonight, but I think it's a really good question. I'm big on policies, right? So that, right, I think that the select board has every right to say we're gonna enact a policy if that's something they feel passionate about. But you also can change the design as well, if we got to that point. Not ideal, but
It seems to me watching your meetings that you did quite a bit of design changing to get to where you are. So I'm somewhat of a skeptic that the design change that further would be feasible, but
it's more the
I know it's speculation.
materials that you use.
Okay.
I think
As
there's Marcy
opposed-
in there too. We're still carrying a 1.5% grossing factor, which is what a lot of people do at this phase. Some of the schools that have come out recently have come down a little bit in terms of that extra grossing factor, which is the other square footage besides the classrooms and the space. So, we're hoping when we get to the final design, maybe we can squeeze a little extra square footage out of that. So there's different, as Jason's point, there's design things that you can do that aren't going to affect the educational plan, but maybe can save us a little money that we are definitely going to be on top of. And if I don't know if anybody's watched some of the meetings, I would say we are scrutinizing every square footage that we can.
And probably my last question is, the cost of repair that you had in one of the slides for Neary at 63 million. I think when you take this project in the context of the time it's going to take to pay it off if it passes, what is the plan for the other schools to avoid falling into such disrepair that they're not repairable, right? As we sort of project the Neary as now.
Yeah.
It's probably beyond this meeting, but I'm afraid that if that's not monitored, we're gonna need another new school in 10 years, over 30, we're still paying off, right? Like, so that's a big question for me.
I do want to answer that now, and welcome others weighing in. So I think there's a few things to consider. I was not a resident of Southborough 25 years ago when the town decided to build everything, and I mean this with all respect to anyone that was involved in the decisions at the time. You always do what you think is right in the moment. But my personal belief, right, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the community, I'm speaking individually, we made a colossal mistake with how many schools we built at the same time, and we backed ourselves into today, right? So we basically renovated or built 3 schools at the same time. We felt that debt burden, and it was significant for many years. Now, the state reimbursement procedures were very different back then too, and I need to acknowledge that. But we chose not to do something to Neary. Ideally, we would have also done something near at the time. And I know there's a lot of study, and Mark would probably, if I let him, but I may not let him, like go down to the whole rabbit hole that they were going down at that time. So I think the way the committee has approached this is Finn would come offline as a school if this were to pass, right? What you would need to do to maintain, we've still budgeted a roof, you still need to have a roof, can't leak in there, right? We don't want water in there. But what you would do to maintain that building is going to be different going forward because it's not going to be a school than what you need to do. And remember, half of that building is 25 years old, half of it's 50 years old. Woodward, go walk in it. It does not look 25 years old, and that speaks to how we actually are maintaining our assets. The fact that we got this far with Neary means we've been doing something okay on the maintenance. I'm not going to say it was good. I'm not going to say it's great, but I think our best estimate is we're not going to be looking at a major project on a school until we get to Woodward, which should be about 25 years from now, which should line up nicely with this. So I think we also need to be realistic, right? That you're probably always going to have debt related to schools on your books. And I don't think, and if anyone can cite a town that doesn't have that, I think we would be all ears. But I think that's how we're thinking about going forward. I'm going to now answer your question on the inverse because I think it's equally as important, and it certainly factored into why I voted the way I did back in August. If we consolidate into different schools, like if we take some of the other theories that are out there in terms of other plans and consolidate into other schools, or we just decide to keep Neary going as long as we can until it's just not safe to be in anymore. Finn is going to, yeah, and need something to be maintained as a school. Our estimated horizon is 5 to 10 years. Even if you take a 15-year window, that's too soon to be trying to do something at Finn. If we had built a 2-grade school at Neary or renovated or done something else. So that's why we were so caught up on the economies of this project, because it eliminates exactly your fear.
Is that it? Where's Larry? Who's in the audience?
Do we have Larry online?
Larry and Adam.
Larry and Adam? Larry, Adam, any questions? Feel free to raise your hand.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, Larry.
So first of all, I want to agree with what's been said, that I think the committee has done an amazing job here. And some of the differences between the numbers today and the numbers that we saw in December are profound and really change a lot of my opinions. The drop from a net of about 82 to 68 is a huge drop. But the other thing that I find exciting is something that I was interested in December and didn't exist, and that's the operational savings. And I think that's critical. As was pointed out, that offsets, at least based on the estimate that Mr. Martineau gave, roughly 25% of the debt service. And my one question is, I think he said that was a fairly conservative estimate. I'm just wondering if he has an estimate of what the range might be on that. I mean, is it, 1.2 million, but it could be as much as 1.3, or is it 1.2 million and could be as much as 1.7 or 8? I'm just wondering roughly what kind of range he sees there, if he has any idea.
You don't have to answer that question. You don't have to answer that question. I think we've set a floor. That's my words. That's why I'm interrupting a little bit. So if you want to go further, but I think it's premature.
Okay. That's all I had.
Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Really nice presentation, and I appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this. It's very clear that you guys have put a ton of effort into this. So thank you for all that. My question is more about the do nothing scenario, and whether in your conversations from past town meetings or along the way, if you're still hearing, because I feel like I felt this throughout the last year or so, a sentiment around what other alternatives are there if we don't do one of these types of projects and keeping the schools up to code and renovating. Do you feel like the presentation that you currently have adequately will address that in town meeting and prevent some of the swirl that we see happen in town meeting when you get to a point where there's enough people who say, I don't have enough of the details here on what the alternatives are. Let's put a pin on this and hold it to a future town meeting. I don't want to see that happen. I'm supportive of this plan. I actually grew up in a elementary school that is very much consolidated, similar to what we're proposing here, and I see all the benefits of that, and as a child remember those benefits. So I'd like to see this go forward, so my question is, do you feel like we're going to, with the presentation as is here, avoid the contingency that might still be saying, let's do nothing, let's kick this can down the road? Are we giving them enough facts for why that's not the right choice?
So I would say we have heard that, but we've heard far more frequent comments about a number of other topics, whether it be cost, site, grade configuration. While I'm sure there are critics and would say do nothing is an option, that's not something we hear as often, but I don't want to dismiss it. So I firmly believe it's this committee's job to make sure, example, this presentation, if anyone wants to listen to it on replay, which is going on 2.5 hours plus at this point, like this is an option to educate folks. We need to do it in small bits too. People don't have the attention span for 2.5 hours. But our job as a committee is to educate prior to walking into town meeting. Our job also is that there should be no new facts that we're presenting. And I think you'll find that's consistent. We certainly may have new and different slides that are responsive to feedback we get through the questions. But I think our job is to educate before we walk into that room, because like we were somewhat joking about earlier, is it's going to be a short presentation. We're not going to be able to take a tour of the Neary school. So I would advocate that anyone that listens to this replay, Adam, and has any concerns about the conditions of the building and thinks that do nothing is an option, I would just ask that they find a way to tour that building. We will make arrangements to get them in outside of school hours and judge for themselves. That's all I think we can do as a committee in terms of our educational requirements.
That was my only question.
Okay,
Makes sense.
Tim is not in audience.
Who's up?
Views?
No, it's not on.
It's on. Okay, so I did.
That's it.
All right, so select board, I actually sent an email to make sure that any remaining questions, select board, that we were prepared for. So the only person responding was Al. So Al asked 3 questions. What Al, if you want to start with those, we can. Anything else you want to add, we can. Or any other thing. Does anybody else select board have questions besides Al? Okay, you want to do your one and then we'll go down.
This is gonna be a hugely unpopular question. It's the Lundblad Field question.
From Blackfields, yeah. What about it?
If that comes up at town meeting, how will you be able to respond to that?
So the question is, for anyone who didn't hear Marguerite, is just about how you're going to respond to questions about Lundblad Field at town meeting. I think a lot will come, right? We've done a presentation to this group once. Nothing has changed in terms of our knowledge or data or anything else around that. I think it's important for us to acknowledge the amount of discussion that has occurred around that, which is also why we're having a separate forum around it. So I think we will be ready to answer questions. We'll also make sure that the experts are in the room as well to be able to, if there's a question that potentially comes up. But we would also, given the very technical nature of that, if people have unresolved questions, let us know. Are we going to be able to fully answer them to someone's satisfaction? I don't know, but we're always happy to answer them in advance. But if someone just says a blanket broad question like that, we're going to say we've considered it and are comfortable. I would probably ask Mark to come to the mic and as our biggest critic of that topic on our committee. And obviously we're limited with how much time we usually have at the mics and all of that, but broad questions, I'd probably want it to be a little more specific.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you for all the work you've done on this.
Thank you.
So Al, do you want to go over your 3 questions first, or do you want to ask something different?
I guess I have a couple of observations and but by the way, I know you guys have worked very hard on this. I as somebody who's volunteered on a variety of things, I know what a thankless job it is. My job is equally thankless. I've been on the select board for 2 years, and this is only the second forum where the select board has actually met and able to have a discussion with the Neary Building Committee. This is without a doubt, the biggest fiscal impact that the town is likely to see in the next 10 to 15 years. My criticism in this area relates not to you, but to the select board. I believe we have been remiss in our oversight obligations. And if this passes, I believe that we need to have a completely different model of oversight that involves the select board actually meeting and discussing status and progress rather than waiting a year and a half before we actually hear from a committee. On the 17th of December was the first time we met least in my tenure, a 2-year tenure. And on the 22nd, I sent a fairly detailed set of questions to the committee, which until now have not been answered. I won't burden you with them now, but I will expect a written answer. I took the time to write my questions out, and I would like the courtesy of a written answer. It's been 3.5 months. So I do have a couple of observations and questions. By the way, Jason, you do an excellent presentation as always. My first observation is, the analysis is done based on a 30-year bond. And if I were sitting in your shoes, I'd probably do the same. The reality is that some portion of our bonding will probably be for a period shorter than that, because some of the assets in the building will not have an expected life of 30 years. I know that was certainly done here as well. So things like technology and furniture, to the extent that they are bonded, cannot be expected to live. So that we'll see some adjustments there. Talk to me a little bit more about the contingency, which is the sum that we have to deal with, that we reserved for dealing with an uncertain world, which has certainly gotten a lot less certain recently. What is the contingency in the current plan?
Andrew, Kathy, you want to walk through that?
The total's 12, but there's, I have to pull up the actual 3011.
Yeah. So when Andrew refers to 3011, there's a form we had to submit to the state, which is how they determine what's reimbursable and what's not. He is our committee expert, so he has every single number. So I want to make sure we get the numbers correct on this.
Yeah. And there's different kinds of contingencies. The first one should be the design one, right? So,
yeah. While he pulls that up, I acknowledge we haven't replied to your note. I'd like to think I'm a responsive individual. We honestly didn't have the data up until candidly the last couple of weeks, so I will take the slides and any other supplemental detail that made the slides and make sure we get you that answer.
Okay. So if somebody is out busy calculating that, I'll move on to. I would like to see detail on the operational savings. What I'll note is the debt is certain. The operational savings are a promise. When we built this building, we were promised a substantial energy reduction. And then when we got to the floor of town meeting, that promise disappeared. So I'd like to see significantly more detail on that. And as a reminder to the superintendent, I have a long memory. But a short memory.
I got that.
Well, on the other hand, I'm getting older and that memory is failed. Yeah. My short-term memory is not so good. My long-term memory is pretty good.
So I got the contingency.
Okay.
So the first one is $6.3 million in design and pricing contingencies. So I think Jason is wrong, but that's for basically unknowns that will come up between now and the construction design phase in terms of, whether or not something needs to be adjusted. There's a GMP contingency, which is to do with the construction management at risk, right?
Yes.
And then there's
I'm sorry.
What was that number?
And
that number is 2.5 million. And then there is another construction contingency, which is like our construction contingency, which is 2.2 million. And then another owner's contingency of 1.3 million.
So that adds up to about $12 million.
It does. That's what it is.
Which is about 11% of the total.
Which at this stage is pretty standard for the design piece.
Is that included in the 109 million or is that above the
included.
109 million? It's included.
Yes. Yeah, we talked about that a little bit on the finance committee call the other night, that we're carrying, roughly that 10-12%, whatever it would be, contingency, especially when the conversation came up about we have uncertainties, and that's why we carry that at this point in time. And when you get through the construction phase, doing construction management at risk, you're working with your builder in the design, so the numbers are much firmer at that point in time, so. A lot more confidence at that point.
Back to you,
Those are my remaining questions.
Sam.
Yeah, thanks. I'd reiterate the thanks to the committee, not only effort, but this is an extremely qualified committee that have done this. These folks are experienced, skilled, thoughtful, and have the best interests of the town at heart. So I think we couldn't have done a better job getting a committee. Plus the extraordinary effort, I think, has given us a great product here. So we all owe a great debt to the committee that's done this. Thank you. I have a slightly different view from my colleague of the oversight thing. As you folks know, I've actually attended or viewed almost every meeting of this committee over the last 2.5 years. And I think I've had a good track of what's going on and had an opportunity to ask questions and get informed about it. So I think the opportunity was there. I didn't think we needed as formal a process as Mr. Hamilton thinks, but people have different opinions on things. So I think there was oversight from the select board all the way through here. And again, I think that we wound up with a good product, that's a recommendation that balances a variety of very competing interests. It's a complicated process, and it seems to me that with the proposal, we actually get a number of important things. A new Neary that's an educationally effective facility, that's operationally efficient, and that offers 40, 50 plus years of use down the road here, which is important. And it provides a flexibility from a repurposed Fenn in terms of additional town offices that give us capability to deal with the unanticipated fluctuations in school enrollment. And we've got 3 40B projects hanging out there now. We've got the MBTA Communities Act that nobody knows exactly what's going to happen with that. So it's conceivable, unlikely, I think, but conceivable that we wind up needing more school space. And again, Fenn gives us some backup capacity there. And the big thing for me is that the MSBA reimbursement is basically in hand at this point. And I've worked on several committees with folks around this part of the state, and I hear tales of schools that are going through the pipeline here. Brockton has what, close to $1 billion school, 700 million or so. There are a couple of other $400 to $700 million schools. Somerville has $1 billion school process. MSBA has a fixed budget basically that increases by a small amount each year. So it would not at all surprise me if we wound up that we don't do this now. If we wound up 5 years down the road, that we have a much smaller pie to split up there. So to me, it's big money here that makes a difference. And we also, in my view, have had a history of kicking the can down the road on projects that have been very expensive for us. And we did a great job on the public safety building here. As we look at some of our neighbors who didn't do it when we did it, they wound up having a huge cost increase. So I think there's value of doing it now, making a decision and going forward. So I think we've had a thorough process. We've got a good recommendation here. Everything seems to me to make good sense here from a variety of perspectives. So I think we've got a great option here to pursue, and I hope we improve it. So thank you.
Andrew.
Sam, Jim, I agree with you strongly. I support the project. I think that the building committee had a lot of trust and confidence in the committee. We need to do something with Neary. It's not in a good state of repair. I think there's a emerging consensus around that. Doesn't make sense to just fix it up. And then once you agree on that, the different permutations of the different designs that you could do, that's an area where reasonable people could differ, and there's a lot of analysis that can be done. That's what the committee did. I thought the key inflection point was over the summer, and it was just dictated by the MSBA process that's when the decision needed to be made, was to do a new 2-grade school or a new 4-grade school. And I think the key thing was that the added cost of the new 4-grade school wasn't that much higher than the total costs of doing the new 2-grade school. I think, Al, you do make a good point that the associated operational savings, those are more difficult to predict. And some, I think in my own analysis, I factor in that maybe they're not going to be realized to the extent that we're even assuming here. But you know, at the end of the day, I think a key point in the slide was about the cost of borrowing versus the acceleration of construction costs. And you know, we do this, or we have to have some other plan. What is the other plan? And I thought one point that I found very persuasive that Jason made at, I think, one of our meetings in the last year was about, you know, the lesson of this building. I think the lesson of this building has been a success story. And we got a combined police and fire station. You think of, I think is it Ashland, who I know they're now doing, I think, a new.
Ashland's done, North Road just voted on a fire
Okay.
station.
Yeah, so the numbers there of where you did two separate, you waited and you did two separate projects later, and the costs were extraordinarily more expensive. So, you know, I think actually the select board is you know, pretty focused on the long term and being fiscally responsible. This is one where it's probably more of the fiscally responsible thing to tackle this now rather than just letting it, you know, kick the can down the road. So that's why I hope that we get a positive vote in May.
So I don't have questions for obvious reasons, but I do think it's important to look at my friends in the audience that are very concerned about cost and say to you, I hear you. I was very concerned about cost too throughout this project. Until the last couple of weeks before we voted on August 12th, I was going to support a 2-year new school. And the reason I was going to support that versus a renovated anything is because the cost of renovation is more than building from scratch, which the estimators showed us. When we got the first set of estimates in May, the cost of taking Neary and renovating it and making it a 4th-grade school was $149 million. The cost of building a new 4th-grade school was $141 to $146 million. So once I saw that, I definitely got into the camp that we should build new. We could get a much better school instead of, you know, trying just to renovate what we had. We get the modern state-of-the-art school that can teach kids better. But I still was stuck on the 2th-grade school because I was very concerned about the tax impact to this town, especially with the growing number of seniors we have in town, which we found out when we did our demographic studies. When we did the demographic studies, we realized that the surprising thing wasn't the kids, it was the seniors. 30% of our population is going to be seniors in 2030 if those studies are close. So I went through the whole summer on the finance subcommittee thinking two grade. But then we got the estimates. So we've had 2 sets of estimates. We got one right before August and then one in February. So the one in August showed that there was a huge economy of scale of building the 4th-grade school. I also had felt guilty all along the summer after listening to the very passionate case made by our educators as far as why the 4th-grade school would much better educate our kids in their very educated opinion. They know how to teach kids. I don't. So I gave a whole lot of credit to what they were telling me and really wanted to support the 4th-grade school, but I just didn't want the tax hit for that. So when I saw that the new 4th-grade school was only 50% more than the 2th-grade school, not twice, that's why I changed my mind. So I did change my vote for Argus to basically do the new 4th-grade school for those reasons.
Yeah, and to elaborate on Kathy's, I was the other kind of maybe major holdout on the 2. At the time when we voted, it was still a significant cost, right? Even the 4th-grade option new. And you know, reluctantly, I said, okay, yeah, I agree. The 50% of the economies of scale there, it makes sense. With today's numbers and how we've gotten the reimbursement up and the work we've done to lower the square footage and the efficiencies we found and the great work we've done with everybody involved, I think the 4th-grade is definitely the option. Especially when you take into consideration that most likely, you know, 10, 15 years from now, we'd have to do a major renovation to fit. And I do think that is the case. I mean, I've been in that building. It looks exactly the same as when I was a student there. At least half of it.
But you don't.
But I don't, yeah. But the toilets are way smaller than I was. But So I think, looking at it, that case, knowing that like we were over in the amount of square footage we needed, but it wasn't well designed, it wasn't efficiently laid out. Jason's point, we did too many schools at one time. This will allow us to basically reset that calendar and get on a better cycle. Yeah, I would hate to do a 2-grade school and then 10, 15 years from now, do another, $50-60 million renovation of Finn. Because that's 50 years old at this point. But I just think this, I mean, it's a big number. If I'm still on the Neary Building Committee, if anybody's been watching the meetings, I will hold the feet to the fire for every dollar of cost savings as the design goes through to make it as efficiently from a cost perspective. But I think from the longevity of this town, this is the time to do it. This is the model to do for it.
All right, so now let's go back to the audience. I think we had a question. So, yeah, well, let's go here because we've heard from this gentleman.
Bob Meyer on 12 Parkerville Road. The Neary landfill. Opened in 38, closed in 75. God knows what's in there. We put some plastic over it, right? Like a Home Depot trash bag. The DPW has to go around, look for gopher holes and make sure wasn't no broken seals or anything. Not high tech. I watched your meeting from July 22nd last year, and you had a consultant on about the Neary landfill. Couple of things. There's already arsenic and heavy metals in the groundwater. The groundwater flows north, and your consultant says something like, "Well, that's okay because residences they're all on town water." Every house between Neary and Main Street is on town water. And there are some people on the east side, I think, are still using their dug wells. What is Board of Health, what has Conservation Commission said about the site?
Why isn't this in the presentation at all? Nothing about the landfill.
Well, first of all, it has been part of prior presentations and we have it in the appendix if you'd like to go there. But this is why we specifically are having a separate meeting on it, because there's some very technical questions like you're asking now that we think we owe an answer to, right? Like any sort of questions, but that's why we're having that separate meeting and discussion next week.
Will this be and will this be added to this presentation that you present at the town meeting?
I don't know how long they're going to give me to present, so
Because I think it has a lot to do with.
we'll have
You're
something
building a
about,
school on a site with a big landfill on the top of a hill. I mean, it's.
There are a whole bunch of issues. I was on the Tri-View Building Committee. I was the guy put in the speed tables, worked with Billy Cleary to get the speed limit down to 30 because the state wanted to keep it at 35. And I put the sidewalk in. And of course, Monday morning, I asked John Bowman, I said, John, it's a straight shot from Main Street to Neary. They wouldn't put the pipes in. So we would not have had that problem. But it's a problem we live with all the time. We get our wells tested, but if you have a test for heavy metals, you don't know what you have to test for. And that's like $100 for benzene. We can't afford to test for these things. And right now, the only thing the state or the town is doing is checking every 6 months. And when you disrupt that, let alone putting in geothermal, what do you think you're going to do to the groundwater?
What are you going to do with the groundwater?
You don't think, Mark, that's not going to affect anything?
No, I can answer that. The geothermal is we're putting in wells, deep wells, beyond, we're going deep. And it's a closed system. So whatever we bring up to cool or heat the building circulates and goes back down into the ground. And we have about, I can't remember the number. I'm going to have to educate myself. I think it's around 40 wells, but they're all north and west, far from where we are now. When I got on this committee, I got on really for not only for my construction experience, but I've worked with dirty sites. I've worked with challenging sites. And I was concerned. And I think anyone on the committee will know I asked and asked and the questions were on the table constantly. We brought in, Bill Cunda from DPW. We brought in the engineer who actually did the testing. We went through it all. And based on my experience and what I'm seeing, yes, there's stuff in the groundwater, but as you move further and further away from the landfill, it decreases and decreases. And yes, the groundwater is flowing north to west, which is in that whole wetlands catchment area, which is what it felt when we voted it in the 90s to put that cap on top. The cap isn't a plastic cap, it's a clay cap. And it was done under the government standards to cap a landfill.
But it's not
And that-
encapsulated.
And the state is required, and they've recently changed their regulations. They will be testing it. They do it twice a year. One for the groundwater testing and the deep groundwater testing. And then they also test for gas because gas rises. Based on what the experts were telling. And based on the test results I was able to see, nothing really has changed in the last 30 years. And we subsequently have done we haven't done any real groundwater testing. Eventually we will when we get into the construction phase up closer to the school. When we did hit the groundwater and some of the testing that we did do and borings that we did do, you can do a field summary of what's there. And basically they didn't see any VOCs, volatile organic compounds, which you can see them in the water. There was nothing present that an engineer at that level was not concerned with. We'll have a full presentation
What's concerned?
next week. And the Bill Condiff will be there, the consulting engineer for the town. I have worked with both of those individuals for 30 years and have a lot of respect in them and their expertise. And based on the number of times we met, the number of reports we went over, the number of times we talked with that engineer, and the engineer in the selectmen's meeting basically said, sure, there is stuff there and you can see it, but it is not anywhere close to the levels of concern that the EPA, the federal government comes out for various components.
What happens when they disturb the footprint? How does that change? And who's gonna test it?
What footprint are we disturbing?
If you build a new Neary there, you
We're
can
building-
get it to perk.
We're building the new Neary on the old Neary.
And it's already parked.
We have a perk test.
You're gonna build it on the same footprint.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That has to be monitored. I'm sorry. I mean, what are we supposed to do?
If the groundwater goes north and west,
They live north.
We live north
it's
and west.
not, it's not going closer to the school. 30 years of testing shows the same kind of results in the closest test to the school, which is, I think, on the corner of the field. The DePetrie field is that one right there.
That's the closest that they tested right on the corners of the field.
Yeah.
They haven't gone out from that a little bit to see.
No, those were set in 1995, according to the government regulations and our regulations. They set up those tests and monitored from that point forward. Now they're going to be monitoring it in perpetuity. We did that cap about the same time other towns did the same. Because there's a lot of towns around that had landfills like this. And the state has decided they'll just keep agreeing to test these things. But ours really hasn't changed in 30 years.
Well, I do think it's a bit deceptive not to have anything in the presentation about a, landscape that, land fill that you say has a lot of whatever you say, slush or whatever in it.
I mean, if you want people to get on board, there are a lot of people who are very concerned about this and nobody's reaching out to them. We're in the center of town, we're all on wells.
Come to the meeting Monday night.
Next one, Wednesday.
It's Wednesday. What night is
It's Wednesday.
Wednesday?
There's another meeting on Monday night.
I have another meeting on Monday night.
Wednesday, April 16th.
April 16th.
Location, please.
I believe it's gonna be a Trotter.
And virtual.
No.
Trotter
because we
is,
can't
that's
do
why we're here tonight, so,
Okay.
We wish.
Yeah. we will have, it will be recorded. It'll just be a matter of whether it's live or not.
But they're suggesting that we do add some slides to the presentation.
Yeah.
And so, we hear you.
And it is in the appendix of the presentation that we just showed. We should get.
I was ready for it, but that's, I think we hear your concerns, but I think if it wasn't evidence enough, like we scheduled a separate meeting related to that site because we realized it has a bunch of different avenues to it. And yes, we will present something on it, but again, it's gonna come down to how, like, we have a lot to cover in whatever time we're given.
Sure.
So, and we will be, you should ask questions and we should be ready.
Yep.
And if any residents, especially in your neighborhood, where it seems like you're proximate to the school, have questions about it, like, let's talk before that discussion, and we're not trying to, like, just, but if you have questions, like, we're willing to hear them. I don't want to sign Mark up, but Mark loves to talk about this topic, so,
Board of Health and Conservation Commission already plugged into this discussion?
Yes,
Okay.
they had actually, Board of Health was at that meeting. And Conservation was at that meeting as well. And I'll go over it on the 16th. There are some design considerations that we've added to the school. Under the building, under the foundation, we're protecting it from high groundwater. We're protecting it from anything that might come up. We're pulling that moisture away from the school. And we'll be putting 3 wells right in front of the school and add those to the testing program. So we constantly can monitor what's going on down there by the landfill and what's coming up at the school. Right now, that foundation has nothing. It doesn't even have any vapor protection. So that's why when we did this, we talked to the engineer and asked him that question. What could we design in here to give us that added protection? The little bell and whistle that tells us there's a problem. And that's what, and he'll come prepared, because I've asked him, to really define that. What are we getting in this system? So I encourage you to go to the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, it's getting late, so let's do Bonnie.
Patty's been waiting, so I'm gonna overreach.
Patty,
So
go first.
Patty's been definitely waiting, so.
I have 2 questions. They can be fairly quick. Somebody was talking about part of the plan of the new school is that you plan to rehome some of the special needs students that are now outsourced to other schools. So you're taking into account space in the new school for that. And I'm just wondering what specialized teachers and how many would need to be added in order to localize those students back to us?
So I can start.
There must be a different student teacher ratio.
Some of those programs exist, but they have an age span that they can serve. So like Woodward has a specialized program that we don't then replicate the same program at Neary currently. And you can't have too large of an age span within the same classroom. So some of those things have to do with, we already have people with those skill sets, but we don't have, like, so for example, there's another program that we have in Northborough, and some of our students have to go to Northborough for that program, but we're designing this to be able to serve those needs within the Southborough system.
So
No additional staffing.
So I can add to
required?
that. So students who were unable to meet their educational needs, who require a different school outside of schools of Southborough, are expensive. The tuition for those schools can range anywhere between $80,000 to $250,000, and we have cases where it's $450,000. So depending on the student and where the student is in placement, we're projecting that anywhere between $250,000 savings, which would also be able to support the staffing required to stand up those types of programs. So that's what we're looking at. The space is specifically designed for sub-separate programs. And currently there is not space, not the ability to add those types of programs at.
Okay. So I think we already talked about the 5 through 8 at Trottier. So the real concern here is that obviously whether we overbuilt Trottier or what the story is, we ended up with Trottier, which is 130,000 square feet, and Neary, which is half the size. You're proposing building a new school that is still 30% smaller than what we already have. So logically, it would make sense to make that our largest populated school. I understand that you don't want to, the educational staffing that made that decision not to put 5th through 8th, even though you didn't really talk to other schools that were doing that successfully throughout the state. But was it ever considered to make Trottier a 4-grade school of 3, 4, 5, 6 and put 7 and 8 at Woodward, which, if I remember correctly, before Woodward was renovated, it was the 7th and 8th grade.
We did not study that. I mean, there are different iterations we did not.
But in that, still, we're going to concede that in that scenario, you would not be putting 5th graders with 8th graders. So you'd be solving that issue. And you'd also be accommodating the highest population of grades, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 4 grades in the largest school we have, which is, again, 30% larger than the school you're intending to build.
Let me just add one thing. Remember, Trottier has an auditorium. So
It's 5,000 square feet, Jason. I actually asked.
yeah,
about
no,
that.
I understand.
So
It
that's 125,000.
also has essentially a double, the gymnasium in that building is twice the size of what we're proposing to build at Neary roughly. So I will not let Greg off the hot seat. You did ask him a question, he'll answer it, but I think I said it earlier. We acknowledge that Trottier is bigger than the current student population, right? Even without some of these special amenities. That's why we didn't actually go forward with an auditorium at Neary, despite a decent amount of public interest in us continuing that discussion. We had to weigh, some of those discussions. I would ask Greg, when you respond to this question, though, let's just say you were in support of using Trottier or Patty's comment. What would have to change in the school? Like I know you don't have a number, but like what just
Well, I guess
are there any
my
examples?
question really, Jason, was that ever considered? And I think the answer was no, it was not considered.
Yeah, but do you have
So
off the
it's
cuff
kind of-
No, I mean, I think
answers of
that,
what would have to change?
First of all, I think Trottier was specifically designed to be a middle school. I think that the building committee that built near Trottier, it's middle school. So I think that making it an elementary school and then making Woodward a middle school per se. I think in terms of the gymnasium, academic spaces, music performance, it's just not designed for that. Science labs. So again, it wasn't.
But it wouldn't take $108 million to make those changes.
Studied.
And when you talk about being purpose-built for specific grades, I don't think that Woodward was purpose-built to put kindergarten and preschoolers in there with the open stairways and the setup of that school, but you are intending to repurpose that for that purpose.
Woodward is an elementary school.
Are you saying that those stairways are safe for pre-K students?
Yes.
Really? Shocking.
Most
Okay.
schools that are being
Bonnie?
built now are 3 stories, not 2 stories. And
No,
they're
it's-
K
it's-
through,
the way, the rotunda area.
You're,
where
at-
the
yeah,
way
so
it's-
let's be clear,
The-
the rotunda, that's part of the item I mentioned. That may require some safety modifications to it. The stairs themselves, though.
Mhm.
That is how most towns that are building kindergarten buildings,
Mhm.
they're putting stairs in. And they're actually putting kindergarten on the third floor. That was a shock to me. But they're actually building, and kindergarten's going to the third floor because of the developmental aspects that come with that. So obviously, these buildings have elevators as well for those that are not able to do that, but. I think there's two different things. I don't think it's the stairs. I think you're asking about the rotunda.
Right, the rotunda,
Okay.
sorry. But I think the point is that you're thinking creatively on how to reuse Woodward. But you did not think creatively on how to use Trottier to its most advantage, given that it is our largest school. And a perfect situation or an option would have been to look at, could it house 3, 4, 5, 6, or 4, 5, or 3, 4, 5, 6, or 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'm not sure that either one of those options, which would have been considerably less in cost and not funded by MSBA because there was no addition or new build. I'm not convinced that either one of those options were truly considered. That from the get-go, this was a project to spend the money and build or add on.
I don't know that any single person wants to pay a penny more on their taxes. I don't, right? But I think to imply that this was just to do something, just to do something, I think is just a terrible
I'm not implying that at all,
misrepresentation.
Jason. That's not at all what I'm
We didn't
saying.
go into this with any preconceived notions that I'm aware of. We really did.
Well, but you said that the 12 criteria, the 12 options were directed by MSBA.
They took a look at our school system and the configuration and
So
based on their
the
vast
only
experience, they
options
said
they're
these are the
going to
12
give you are ones that are going to fund an addition, renovation, or new builds. So
they took
neither
a
the
look, they didn't
committee.
do that arbitrarily. They took a look at our school system, the great configuration, and they felt those were the 12 that would be the most realistic. So I don't know what they thought about Trottier.
Well, but
Why did
So
you
again,
guys look
so
at it?
again, the committee or the town never considered an option of fully utilizing the 130,000 square foot space of Trottier as a 4th-grade school. I think that
We did study, that was the 5 through 8th grade option that was evaluated. At the very beginning in 2020, 2021.
okay, and set aside because you didn't want fifth in it together, which we have proven from other schools in the state, is this a successful model? And can be.
It's getting late. Bonnie?
Follow up to Patty's. Number one, I voted for the Trotter School. It's a middle school. I don't think we need to revisit that. I paid for it as a senior. I had no children in any of these new schools. However, I am fortunate enough to have 9 of my grandchildren in all of them. So I think Trottier should be off the table. It suits the purpose for that age group. And let's not forget the outside atmosphere that adds to that school for that age group as well. But my question is, when we're building Neary, we're talking about future population that we're building for. I know you can't project them. None of us can. However, I'd like to know what the occupancy of Woodward is today, because we might be underestimating what the population could be moving into that school. And are we prepared for any potential growth in the same window of time? That needs to be answered.
Do you have the
because
number,
we
Sandy,
don't
or
want
do you
Yeah,
to-
so
wanna-
if we had a 4th-grade school.
No, I'm talking
option,
about K to 1. What's the occupancy of the school for K to 1? And projecting there may be some growth and it may hit that school. What is the potential for additional students to occupy that school? Am I making myself clear?
Yes, so occupancy.
You might want that number.
We have it.
I can,
You have it. Greg, I'm pulling it up right now.
the occupancy is 675.
For Woodward.
No, that's for Finn.
Woodward's 500.
522.
And how many are in it now?
So I'm just gonna read from the study, and my understanding is our enrollment hasn't changed materially between
Okay.
grades. But our study showed that the occupancy permit for Woodward was 500. And that by having 2 grades there, so students plus staff that occupy the buildings, remember the staff count too, it's 391.
Is it pre-K, K, and 1?
I'm going based off of grades 2 and 3, but remember,
I know,
Every-
but if you added the pre-K, K, and
pre-K,
1, I'm
K1,
moving them over here, correct?
our enrollment study says you need 22 classrooms.
And we have it, right?
We have that, and you need, for pre-K, K and 1, yeah.
Okay, so we're not gonna revisit that in 5 years because we're short-sighted on the.
No, I
potential
think
needed space.
no, in short, we've proven we can fit 2 grades comfortably in there for a while, and pre-K is not a full grade.
Thank you.
Betsy.
Yeah, real quickly, you can blame Barry because I was all clear on the numbers until he asked a question. And he's smarter than I am, and now I'm confused again. Vanessa, could you just pull up the slide that talked about my tax bill? There was a big jump for the next couple years and then everything's gonna go down. And there was a number of this building project, the first year it's bonded. I understand there's some question about exactly when that will be. 703, but then there was a number for my tax bill of 681. And I thought the number that you showed me on the slide for the tax bill was including all these capital projects. So how is my tax bill gonna be 681 for everything if the school is contributing 703?
You ramp up to the 703. Right, so that you actually start, there's a little bit of interest, right, and on the
It's
debt.
not the,
681 says zero.
Yeah, so it's just it's the year over year increase, but you start paying a little bit of interest in FY 26, a little bit more in
just
27.
go to the slide, Andrew, so it, the
Yeah,
good news
right
is,
here.
once you, it's 10 o'clock, but once you explain it
this
to
is-
me,
this isn't the
anybody in
net.
the hall will understand it.
Yeah, so this isn't the net, but
This is
basically
gross,
the idea,
gross.
this is the gross,
This is
right?
gross.
No,
But,
this isn't the slide.
no, but just look at this for 1 second, that's
Yeah,
it. So if
okay.
you go back to that,
Nope.
real quick.
Back up, yeah.
Yeah. So what you're looking at is the year over year increase at that point.
This is not my question.
I know, but
Okay.
it's important for you to understand that, so the 89 would already be in the increase for FY 26. The 562 would be in for 27, 949 and 28. So what you're seeing is that number is like the total debt service number. But in the year over year increase, you build up to it. So it's not that it all hits in like 2031.
Understand. Can we go back to the earlier slide that talked about my tax bill?
Yes,
And
you're
I
gonna
go-
go down to.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, okay. And this is the overall, this is not just this
Be
project.
careful. No, this is just the increase. So take fiscal year 31, right?
Yep.
Your total taxes for that year will be on the average house, 17,555, of which the 703 is part of that number.
Okay, can we go to FY 32? Because we were talking at the bottom. I don't know if she can scroll up, Vanessa, or because we were talking about the figure of 703. This school,
That's
all is
in that.
projected is what?
It's in that number.
The reason it's,
Can you look
let
at
me,
the slide again?
yeah, so
Just put it in slide mother.
Okay. How does 703 go into 681?
So I'll answer that one, and then certainly. You have existing debt now, so there's things we're paying for this year that are gonna just fall off between then. So that's why, like, look at how much the taxes are proposed to go up in the next 2 years. So there's things that we're paying for now, and then we could pull up which capital projects they are, they're just gonna fall off. Right? And therefore, the new debt, based on what we projected, is related to the school project. That's why the school project is actually a greater portion of the increase than the actual increase, because you've got other stuff that just drops off. that's
Okay,
paid up.
we'll have to do this offline because I still don't understand how,
I'll
if
do
the
it with you.
school's gonna cost us 703, you,
Okay.
Calculate.
The school's already in those numbers all the way through, a little
Yeah,
bit.
but how can 703 go into 681?
It's the increase from the prior year.
It's all that exciting. Your taxes are still $18,000
Total.
for fiscal year 31.
Okay.
The project is
I
gonna
just
make
went
my
with third
tax
grade.
bill go
promise-
up 703,
we'll
but
sit
my
down
tax
and-
bill's only gonna go up 681.
So your taxes in fiscal year 32 are still $18,000 in total. The 702 is part of that. The difference between fiscal year 31 and 32 is.
Oh, okay.
These are falling off like.
So if you
in
start
high
with
school.
fiscal year 26 and say, let's just say our tax bill is $10,000. So for fiscal year 26, it's going to be $11,054. And then fiscal year 27, I'm going to add 1423 to the 11,000.
Oh, shit.
That's.
Oh, okay, this is.
Now,
Something about this is not
It doesn't
accurately
really-
portrayed.
Compound it. That's
Yeah, no.
So
not
to get to
understandable.
get to fiscal year 32, you gotta add all the numbers together essentially.
First,
Was part of this because the later years are showing the cost savings from the operational?
Savings from the operational start as soon as next year. I think there's a few things. So one, I think this is good feedback because.
yeah, so just assume you're teaching a fifth grader, because that's probably where I topped out in math. There's a reason they have law schools in this country. It's for people like me. This somehow is not conveying my tax bill. I feel, looking at it.
we can also put next to it what the total taxes are.
Yeah,
This is gonna be, I think we just need a
They're
chart
only
showing
increase.
what it is today. But I think it's also important to know that like, we can show what the increase is, but I think it's also important for us to show where it's coming from, right? How much of it's Neary versus how much of it is other things that you will vote on, as well.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay.
We good.
All right,
We adjourn.
we're not sure we're gonna. Okay, so thank everybody for coming. We've got the future sessions that Jason described. On the select board agenda tonight, we have the ability to actually take the position tonight on the project. We've only got a few days to do this to get it into the warrant. I've got a couple phone calls saying, I really hope you guys vote. I hope advisory votes too, so either that's your call. Want K through 8 to vote too, so Chelsea, it's not on your agenda.
It's
right?
not, but we're
Okay,
meeting Wednesday. We can
Okay.
add it.
All right, so
I'm ready
Say
to
it.
vote.
Okay, you'd like to go?
Yeah.
You're okay voting?
Yes.
Okay, Al,
I prefer not to.
Marguerite? Okay, because you need more information?
I was asked for more information.
3.5 months ago.
Okay, because Al wants us to, like, we actually answered your questions, these slides tonight, we tried to, but if you
Some
want
of
us to.
them, not all of them.
The only one didn't answer is Hopkins, but we had our
That's not
OPM
true.
senior side.
Well, when could we vote the next time if we don't vote tonight?
On the 15th, unless we call a special meeting, and that's the night we're closing the
You can do it
warrant,
at
so,
town meeting, basically.
well, we're not doing it, we want this.
No.
We're talking about,
No, no.
excuse me.
So we could vote, we could
On
vote
Monday.
at our
Oh, that's
pre-meeting.
true, we can
at the
do it,
pre-meeting
that's right,
before
we got the meeting on Monday,
That'll be
that
kinda
we
weird,
said, so
but,
we can do it then.
We've
Okay.
done weird before.
that. I think one of the most important votes in the pre-meeting.
Okay, so.
In the class.
In the room closet.
So here's.
You guys,
We're done, so you are not gonna vote, right?
Fifth grade.
we think, we might, because we're still not gonna, we talked about that town meeting,
So
we're not
if
gonna
you
have full
start,
quorum there, so
just
maybe
say
we'll
you're
vote
good.
and then see where we're at, if we need to hold a special meeting, make sure we have the other two.
Did you just say you wanna vote right
I
now?
think we're gonna vote.
Okay,
So it's support the two Neary articles.
it's actually one,
Just one?
just one.
Okay. I move that advisory committee supports the Neary project article at the special town meeting. Second. Any discussion? All right, roll call vote. Barry? Aye. Marcy?
Yay.
Adam, are you still on?
Aye.
Yeah. Talking, please.
We can't hear you.
Aye. Yes, aye.
Barry?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. Larry still there?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Aye.
Andrew's aye.
Okay, so that was 1, 2, 3,
4,
4,
1.
5, 4, 1, okay. All right, okay, Chelsea's not gonna vote tonight, okay, so I think that's it, so I will make a motion to adjourn select board meeting.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay.
What?
We're gonna hold on and adjourn ours in a second, once we finish so if you can just give us 2 minutes after this.
All right, I move that we adjourn the subcommittee committee.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sam.
Is Chris Evers on the line or not, Vanessa? I move that the Neary Building Committee adjourn. Is there a second? I motion made second, all in favor? All right, that's unanimous.
So as far as minutes tonight, let's we'll take charge of getting the set of minutes done that everybody can use, so we don't.
I'm gonna have to, sorry, it's too late for me to
Larry
understand.
and Adams, hold on one second. We're gonna vote on the letter and the.
I didn't even realize what Barry asked you.
I just want to hear this.
I didn't even know what I didn't know.
No, it's actually phone.
don't know exactly what.
The point is. Yes, Chip.
Vanessa, we're just gonna take. Keep a slide, do 2 votes.
He's coming down.
Yes.
So I can see what was going on. I can show you what your eyes
I want to tell you, I didn't realize you had.
I'm going to my card.
Citation, so I can look at it.
If anybody is done, can you please leave? We're trying to finish our meeting.
I need the statutory reference, so I can look at the front. But I want them to provide, they're making representations to us, they can't.
Anyway, okay, is there a motion to approve the advisory letter? Second. Roll call vote. So Barry.
I didn't ask you to supply that information.
Larry.
Yeah.
We're voting on the advisory letter.
Confused. I used to be a deputy
Thank you.
supervisor.
Actually, hold on, before we do the advisory letter. We should do the. All right, hold that. Table that motion. Betsy, hold on.
And so then, without bringing up this, we can respond to
It's a lot of money.
I can do it. Is there a motion to, for advisory to support the GMU bylaws? And it's not yet. Articles 28, 29. This is to support. If you don't select board, okay, so.
If I understand, anyone at town meeting, I'm your third grader.
Larry, voting on the GMU bylaws, yea or nay?
When it comes to numbers, I am not smart.
Cause I would love.
I watch my.
No, when you work.
No, there's a reason.
You guys just. For like 30 seconds, Kathy. I just need like quiet. Can I just have quiet for 30 seconds, everybody, please? Thank you. Larry, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can.
All right, we're voting on whether to support Article 28 and 29, the ADU bylaws. Barry was a nay, Marcy was a nay, I am a nay, and you are?
I am an A.
Okay. And then, so we will amend the advisory letter to include that vote. Do we have a motion to approve the advisory letter as amended? So moved. Marcy seconded. Larry?
I am a yay on that one.
Okay, Barry? Marcy? Andrews, aye. All right, motion to adjourn. Second, Barry? Marcy? Larry?
Yes, please.
Andrew, aye. Thank you, Larry, for hanging in there. Tell Eileen hi.
Okay. Have a good evening.